I love the Harry Potter movies so much, but as great as they were at bringing the wizarding world to life, one area I think they really struggle at is bringing out the true depth and complexity of so many of the characters. So today, I'm going to take you on a journey looking at the 10 characters that the movies really let down. Deep diving each one, telling you how they were in the books, and then how the films gave us a much lesser version of them. Starting with the one who has maybe done the most dirty, Ron Weasley. If you could be best friends with either Hermione, Ron, or Harry, who would you choose? So I was asked this question on a podcast recently, and I very quickly chose Ron. And Flick, the host, who happens to be the body double for Hermione from the films, by the way, go listen to her podcast after this video. But Flick sounded surprised. She said she asks all of her guests that question, and nobody had chosen Ron before. And that just baffled me, right? And I think it's largely down to how the films really watered down and ultimately destroyed the character of Ron Weasley. They took his bravery and his intelligence and his wisdom and everything that makes him a good friend, and they either removed it or they gave it to other characters, namely Hermione. So in this video, I'm going to look at the key differences between book Ron and movie Ron. So let's talk about Ron's bravery in the books, because this was one of his defining characteristics. He was this unwaveringly loyal friend who would literally stand on a broken leg to defend Harry, which, if you haven't read the books, is something he does in The Prisoner of Azkaban. They just didn't put it in the film, which is a consistent theme through the movies. These moments of Ron's are just lost on screen. Let's look at some examples, shall we? So as I mentioned, The Prisoner of Azkaban, we get this scene in the Shrieking Shack where Harry, Ron, and Hermione are face to face with who they believe to be a mass murderer, Sirius Black. Someone they think betrayed Harry's parents and wants Harry dead. Now in the books, despite having a broken leg, despite being barely able to stand, Ron positions himself between Harry and Sirius Black, and he tells Black if he wants Harry, he's going to have to kill all three of them. He says it once, and then Sirius tells him to sit down, otherwise he'll damage his leg more, and Ron, despite being in pain, says it again, even more firmly. He doubles down against who he believes is a mass murderer. That is proper bravery, okay? But in the movies, Ron is relegated to the background, just whimpering about his leg, while movie Hermione gets the line about, if you want to get to Harry, you'll have to go through us. And this wasn't a one-off, right? Let's look at the Devil's Snare scene in The Philosopher's Stone. Now in the books, all three of them work together. Hermione identifies what it is, Harry suggests using fire, and then when Hermione panics saying there's no wood to start a fire, Ron is the one who keeps his cool and reminds her she's a witch. She can make fire with magic. The whole trio work together, each playing their part, each being useful in some way. But in the movies, Ron just panics and screams for help, while Hermione calmly solves everything by herself. And then Harry has to tell Ron off for taking credit. Now I understand they took away the potions riddle from Snape, which is supposed to be Hermione's thing, and Ron gets the chess and Harry gets the flying keys. They kind of have to give Hermione the Devil's Snare, but by doing that, it completely changes the dynamic, and it makes Ron look useless. And then we have the spider scene in the Chamber of Secrets. Now in both the books and the movies, Ron is terrified of spiders. It's his biggest fear. We see it as his boggart in the following book. The way he handles the spiders in this, completely different from book to movie. Book Ron faces his fear. Despite being terrified, he follows the spiders with Harry because he knows they need answers, because his friend needs help. And even though he's scared out of his mind, he keeps his fear at bay to do what needs to be done. He even manages to keep enough of his wits about him to spot the Ford Anglia and help them escape. But movie Ron just whines and complains pretty much the whole time. He basically begs Harry in the films to go back. He's completely useless in the face of danger. And it's not just the big moments either. Throughout the books, Ron is constantly standing up for his friends. He throws a crocodile heart at Malfoy for mocking Harry. He gets detention for defending Hermione against Snape. He frankly is always ready to stand up and fight anybody who insults his friends. The movies kind of strip all of that away. They take this brave, loyal friend who would literally stand on a broken leg to protect Harry, who would face his worst fear to help solve a mystery, who would always stand up for what is right, and they turn him into this cowardly, comic relief character who's just there to scream and to panic, to be the butt of the jokes, and to make Hermione look better by comparison. And it fundamentally changes who Ron is as a character, and it does a massive disservice to one of the bravest Gryffindors we see in the whole series. So one of the biggest differences between the books and the movies is how the movies completely undermine Ron's intelligence. In the books, Ron is actually really smart. Not in the same way as Hermione, with her books and her studying, but in a completely different way that's just as valuable through the series. Let's look at some examples. Take the wizard's chess scene in The Philosopher's Stone. In both versions, Ron plays chess, but in the books, it's established early that Ron is a chess master and that he can think strategically, multiple steps ahead of whoever he's facing, which is why he consistently beats everybody who plays against him. So when they face McGonagall's giant chess set, it makes perfect sense that Ron is the one who leads them through it. That he's the one who can see the moves ahead, who realizes that the only way to win is to sacrifice himself. And in the book, during that giant chess match, it is mentioned that on multiple occasions, Ron notices Harry and Hermione are in danger, and so he darts around the chessboard, saving them time and time again, before eventually sacrificing himself. In the movie, we don't really see any of this. We see very little of these heroics until the very end of the match, which sort of backs up our point about dulling his braveness. But also, we don't get any of his strategic thinking, his ability to read the game well enough to save them. Sure, like I said, we still get his sacrifice at the end, but it's just not the same. He's not built up as a chess master in the same way. And beyond the chess, the films really strip us of Ron's knowledge of the wizarding world in general. Like in the books, Ron is their guide to wizard culture. He's the one who grew up in the wizarding world, so he's the one that explains things to Harry and Hermione when they wouldn't know them because they grew up with muggles. Like in the Chamber of Secrets, for example, when Malfoy calls Hermione a mudblood, Hermione in the books has no idea what that means, because why would she? She grew up with muggles, she's new to this world, just like Harry is. It's Ron who explains how horrible that word is. He's the one that provides the cultural context and helps both Harry and Hermione understand why everybody reacted so strongly. What does he do in the films? Somehow, Hermione already knows what mudblood means, so she explains it to Harry while Ron just sits in the background, throwing up slugs. Somehow, they manage to take Ron's role as the Wizarding World expert, as someone who's lived in that world for 11 years longer than Hermione and Harry, and they gave it to Hermione, even though it makes no sense for her character. And look, it's not just the big moments, right? Throughout the books, Ron is constantly showing his intelligence. He is quick thinking under pressure, like in the Deathly Hallows, when he mimics Pettigrew's voice at Malfoy Manor, or when he stops Hermione from stunning Grawp during the Battle of Hogwarts because he realizes it would bring down half the castle. He gets similar grades to Harry. He's able to perform magic mostly to the same level. He's just not this bumbling idiot who can barely hold his wand right. But in the movies, they gave us Ron hitting himself in the face with his broom, even though he grew up around magic and has been flying since he was a kid. They take every opportunity to make him look stupid, to make him the dunce of the group, and to make the successes he has kind of look like accidents. And what's really frustrating is they took all of his clever moments and they gave them to other characters, usually Hermione, who somehow now knows everything about the wizarding world despite being just as new to it as Harry. And fundamentally that changes the dynamic of the trio, because instead of each of them bringing something valuable, each of them having their own type of intelligence, we just sort of get Hermione being perfect at everything while Ron bumbles along behind them. So there's a really important distinction that we need to make between being funny and being the butt of the joke. Because in the books, Ron is genuinely hilarious. He's got these quick, witty comebacks, he's got this great sense of humour, his timing is great, and he uses jokes to diffuse tense situations. But in the movies, they turned him into the person we laugh at rather than the person we laugh with. Let's take the scene where Snape calls Hermione an insufferable know-it-all. In the books, Ron jumps to her defence. He stands up to Snape and he says, "You asked us a question, and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told?" It's brave, and it's kind of funny, saying what everyone is thinking, but Ron is the only one with the nerve to say it. But in the movies, Ron agrees with Snape and sort of twists the knife, making Hermione feel worse. Let's look at the Devil's Snare scene again, right? In the books, when Hermione panics about needing wood for a fire, Ron's response of, "Are you a witch or not?" is genuinely funny. He points out how ridiculous Hermione is being, and it actually helps solve the problem. But in the movies, after spending the whole scene screaming in terror, Ron has the nerve to say,
"Lucky we didn't panic."
And it's played for laughs, but we're kind of laughing at how pathetic he is, not at a clever joke he made. And that tone is repeated over and over. In the books, Ron's humour comes from his wit, from his sarcastic comments about the ridiculousness of the situations they're in. He has this ability to make Harry and Hermione laugh when things get dark, and as readers, we laugh with them. But the movies strip all that away, and instead we get Ron making stupid faces, or saying obviously dumb things, or just being scared of everything, or trying to take credit for things he didn't do. They turned him from someone who uses humour to someone who is the humour. He goes from someone who makes jokes to the person who is the joke. And it's a shame, because book Ron's sense of humour was one of the best traits of his character. It wasn't just about being funny, it was also about helping his friends by lightening dark moments. But the humour in movie Ron is all at his expense, and it's about making him look stupid or cowardly or selfish. So let's talk about how the trio works in the books, because it's actually a perfect balance. Each member brings something different, and they each fill a specific role. Harry is our hero, the one who's brave to the point of recklessness, and who follows his instincts. Hermione is our logical mind, the one with the book knowledge, the one who can solve all the puzzles. And Ron is the heart of the group, the one who understands the wizarding world and keeps everyone grounded. In the books, it's kind of like a 40-30-30 split, with Harry taking the lead, but Ron and Hermione being almost equally important. But in in the movies, it's like 45-55, or like 35-65. Hermione becomes pretty much more important than Harry most of the time, apart from Harry's like circumstantial chosen one status. Whereas Ron is just there. Like, look at how they handle group decisions. In the books, all three of them contribute. Like when they decide whether to go with Harry to find the Horcruxes, Ron is the first one to say they're gonna go with him. He makes it clear he's all in before Hermione is even joined too. But in the movies, it's Hermione who says that. Let's look at how they handle emotional moments. In the books, when Hermione's being tortured at Malfoy Manor, Ron is beside himself. He's screaming her name, he's pounding on the door, throwing himself against the walls, completely breaking down, desperate to save her. In the movies, he doesn't really seem that concerned. They took all these moments, all these times where Ron was essential to the group, and they just gave them to someone else, or cut them completely. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione are talking about the future. In the books, all three of them are having this conversation, but in the movies, Ron is sitting on the steps behind them, like he's not even part of the discussion. And it's not just the big moments. Throughout the books, Ron is consistently essential to the group. He's the one who understands wizarding culture, he's the one who explains things that Harry and Hermione wouldn't know, he's the one who keeps the mood light when it gets dark. The movies just strip all that away. They make him this tag-along character, this third wheel, a deadweight, so to speak. And so rather than the trio all bringing something equal, all having a valuable contribution, we get Harry and Hermione as the main duo, with Ron just sort of there. In the books, things are really tense when Ron leaves the Horcrux hunt. Because like I've said, he's the one that keeps them grounded and keeps them light. Though not when he's wearing the locket, of course. In the films, it doesn't really feel like they notice he's gone that much. One of the biggest crimes of the movies is how Ron's character change completely messes up his friendship with Harry. Because in the books, these two are best mates. They are inseparable, they have this bond that runs deeper than just being friends, right? That's not to say they were romantically involved with each other, it's just like, they're best friends. If you've read the Shadowhunters series, they're like Parabatae. But in the movies, that almost feels pushed aside, and Harry and Hermione's relationship almost feels more of a focus. Let's look at some examples. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry's been left in the dark all summer, in the books, Ron is the one to explain everything, who tells Harry they wanted to write to him, but Dumbledore made them swear not to. And it's this really honest moment between friends where Ron is genuinely upset that he couldn't tell Harry what was happening. But in the movies, we're singing that old song again, they give that to Hermione. She's the one who explains everything while Ron just stands in the background. And like I said before, it's not just moments that are given to other characters. Some big moments for Ron's character and Harry and Ron's friendship are just cut completely. When they first meet on the train, in the books, Harry and Ron really connect here. They talk about their insecurities, about their worries, and about their families. It's this really important moment that explains so much about why they become such close friends so quickly. And about why Ron, when he looks in the Mirror of Erised, sees himself standing alone. And those themes carry all the way through to why Ron eventually leaves in the Deathly Hallows. But in the movies, they just eat sweets, and that's it. That's their bonding. These key moments for Ron's character are removed over and over. In the books, Ron constantly defends Harry, apart from when he's feeling particularly jealous in the Goblet of Fire. In the books, he throws a crocodile heart at Malfoy for making fun of Harry. He tells Snape off for picking on his friends. He stands by Harry when Seamus calls him a liar in the Order of the Phoenix. Now granted, that last one does happen in the movies, but for the most part, all of that was cut. All those moments were given to other characters like Hermione. Even in the Goblet of Fire, when Ron is acting jealous, the books explain why through Hermione. They give us this insight into Ron's insecurities, into why he might feel overshadowed. But in the movies, they don't explain any of that to us. So Ron just comes across as a bad friend, with no explanation, no context, no understanding. In the books, this relationship is deep and it's complex. It's a brotherhood, right? It's strong enough to survive jealousy and arguments and even the dark magic of the Horcrux. But in the movies, they just turn into something less. Something shallow, something that feels almost secondary to Harry and Hermione's relationship. And that's such a shame because Harry and Ron's friendship was one of the cornerstones of the books. It wasn't just about being best friends, it was about finding family and choosing your brothers, about standing alongside each other no matter what. The movies missed all of that. They missed the depth, they missed the complexity, they missed what made this friendship so special. And it's all because they watered down Ron's character. So that's Ron. In the books, he is the heart of the trio, but the movies reduce him to a bit of a whimpering comic relief character. And as I mentioned, so many of his great moments are given to Hermione, so you might think that that made her character much better. But that's not the case. Hermione Granger is also done a huge disservice in the films, and this is how. Hermione Granger is the brightest witch of her age. She is the perfect third prong to Ron and Harry, forming the Golden Trio. But if you've read the books and seen the movies, you'll know that they made some big changes to her character for the big screen. Big changes that honestly don't do Hermione any favours. So let's explore the assassination of Hermione's character in the Harry Potter films. Now, for all of Hermione's brains, she also has plenty of flaws in the books. Flaws that allow her to grow and develop. Flaws that allow us to go on a journey with her to overcome them. But those flaws are either glossed over, played down, or downright ignored in the movies. As an example, Hermione is annoying in the books, particularly the earlier ones. Ron and Harry want to have fun, and she wants them to do what she would do. To read, to do their homework, to take notes, to do research. And sure, objectively, these might be better options than just messing around or playing Quidditch or slacking off. And that's kind of why we love Hermione, right? Because she's technically got their best interests at heart. But the way that she nags them, the way she berates them, the way she guilt trips them, and her holier-than-thou tone at times makes her irritating and borderline unlikable in certain moments. But that gives us a far more rewarding payoff in the later books when the three meet at a sort of middle ground. When Hermione lets them copy her answers or agrees to break the rules, and Harry and Ron show more appreciation and respect for Hermione's way of doing things too. But in the films, she doesn't have these flaws. Maybe ever so slightly in the first film, but they're glossed over so much that they're not really considered an aspect of her character. And in so many other incidents, where her character has flaws that allow her to grow later, they're just glossed over or ignored in the films. For example, in the books, Hermione doesn't say Voldemort's name until the Order of the Phoenix, and it's a huge moment for her, and also a huge moment of solidarity with Harry, at a time when he's dealing with the trauma of Voldemort's return the year before, and he feels like the whole world is against him, and Dumbledore, the only person he felt like could fight that fight with him, was ignoring him. So Harry felt so alone, and then Hermione organises the DA, and she says Voldemort's name. After 5 years of her saying you-know-who, she finally musters the courage to say Voldemort's name, and she stands with Harry. But when does she say Voldemort's name in the films? Well, it's right at the start of the Chamber of Secrets, when she steals Dumbledore's line and says fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself. And by saying it so early, it really belittles that moment for her. It doesn't feel significant, and it doesn't seem like the culmination of any sort of growth for her character. And that sort of brings us to the way that the Golden Trio works so well, and it's all because of balance. Harry is impulsive. He takes action. Ron is loyal and full of heart. And Hermione is thoughtful. She's the brains of the operation. The three sides of the scale even each other out. They complement each other, and they give each other balance. But the movies give Hermione so much of Ron's positive moments that it no longer feels like that much of a balance. It feels heavier on two sides. And that might seem like it's making Hermione into this amazing, badass super character, but it's really not. It takes away what makes her human, and the journey that her character goes on. Firstly, there's the fact that Hermione is a Muggle-born, and so her knowledge of wizarding traditions and culture should be flawed, because not everything can be learned from books. Ron, on the other hand, in the books, shows this knowledge many times, with the wizard's chess in the Philosopher's Stone because he grew up playing it, and with the tales of Beedle the Bard in the Deathly Hallows because Ron grew up hearing those stories from his mother. This knowledge comes from Ron so many times in the books, but in the films, there are moments where that knowledge is taken from him. For example, the Mudblood moment in the Chamber of Secrets. In the books, Hermione doesn't fully understand the gravity of what Malfoy has called her, but Ron explains it. That nuanced knowledge of how things work in the wizarding world is so integral to what Ron brings to the trio. But the films had Hermione take that from him. Just like they had her take on so many of his most glorious moments. Ron's moment where he fully embodies a Gryffindor in The Prisoner of Azkaban. Ron had just been dragged off by a giant dog. He has a broken leg, and yet, when his best friend is being threatened, Ron stands on that broken leg and confronts Sirius Black. Who, by the way, Ron thinks is a mass murderer. Ron stands up and he says, "If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill me too." And it is such an incredible, spine-tingling moment of loyalty and love. And in the films, they gave that moment to Hermione. And it's just not who Hermione is, because as loyal and lovely as she can be, it was an impulsive move. It was a little bit thoughtless. And if Sirius really was the psychopathic murderer they thought he was, then Ron would probably be killed there. Hermione's actions would be far more reserved and observant and thoughtful. But in the films, they give this moment to her, and for what? There's another big moment that they take from Ron too, and it is to the detriment of Hermione's growth. In the Philosopher's Stone, when the trio are trying to save the stone, there's a number of tasks they need to get through. Ron's moment to shine is the chess match. Harry's is flying on the broom to catch the key. And in the books, Hermione's is Snape's riddle. But in the movie, they drop the riddle, and so the Devil's Snare becomes Hermione's moment. The problem is, they eliminate such a key part of her character development just by giving her that scene. Because in the book, the Devil's Snare is constricting Harry and Ron, and Hermione gets flustered. She can't remember what she'd learned, and when she remembers it, and remembers she needs fire, she panics because she can't find wood. She forgets she can do magic to conjure it, and it's Ron who reminds her that she's a witch. But in the films, Ron is being crushed by the Devil's Snare, and Hermione manages to solve the issue without much help. But a key part of Hermione's character is that while she's book smart, she chokes in high-pressure, real situations, particularly ones that she can't prepare for. Because Hermione's strength is in assessing her own weaknesses and planning to mitigate them. But when Hermione can't plan for something, she's not able to think or act as quickly as the others. For example, in the Deathly Hallows, when Ron is splinched, Hermione fumbles and panics because Ron is losing blood, and she can't get her hands to do what she wants them to. As brilliant as her knowledge is, it doesn't always translate into action at the key moments. Which is another example of how the trio balances each other out, but the films take this flaw from her. They make her book smart and extremely capable when she has to improvise, which removes any room for growth or development. So Hermione in the movies is this overly polished superhuman. So many of her flaws are taken away, and she becomes this combination of her best bits and also Ron's best bits. And it takes away so much emotional poignancy, not just from the moments that should be really important to her growth, like when she says Voldemort's name for the first time, or like Neville when she comes to life in the DA in terms of applying her knowledge in a practical way, but also when Ron leaves Harry and Hermione in the Deathly Hallows. Sure, it's sad because they lost a member of the trio, but there's such an imbalance with the trio in the films that, besides losing an extra wand, do we really feel like Harry and Hermione are any less capable without Ron? Hermione has taken so much of what Ron has to offer, so you just don't feel the same sense of doom, or that their odds of success have crashed after Ron leaves in the movies. Hermione in the films isn't the Hermione from the books, an actual person with flaws and growth. And she's so much worse of a character for it. Not giving Hermione a journey of growth because she was essentially flawless to begin with is a huge loss for the movies. And, completing the trio, let's now dive into how the movies stripped Harry of so many of the core parts of his personality. Harry Potter is the boy who lived, the chosen one, the hero of the wizarding world. But the thing is, if you've only watched the movies, you don't really know who Harry Potter is at all. You know, a watered-down version who bears very little resemblance to the complex, flawed, and frankly more interesting character that we get in the books. So what exactly did the movies get wrong? And why does book Harry feel like a completely different person? Let's dive in. So if there's one word that describes movie Harry, it's probably calm. If there's one word that describes book Harry, it's definitely not that. You see, movie Harry is this gentle, soft-spoken guy who treats everyone with respect and kindness. He is polite to his teachers, patient with his friends. And even when he's angry, it's more of like a controlled, noble kind of anger. He's basically the perfect protagonist for a family-friendly blockbuster, which is what Harry Potter was. Book Harry is a smart-mouthed teenager who will absolutely destroy you with words if you cross him. Like, he's a good wizard, but the reason he only uses Expelliarmus is because he can do enough damage with his words. Like, take his line to Snape for example. They're having another argument in one of Snape's classes. Snape is trying to get Harry to call him Sir, to which Harry says, "There's no need to call me Sir, Professor." It is funny, it is witty, it's like sarcastic. And that's kind of Book Harry in a nutshell, right? He's 15 years old, he's been tortured by Umbridge, he's got Voldemort messing with his head, and he still has the audacity to sass probably the most intimidating teacher. And the best part is he delivers it completely deadpan, right? Like he's just making polite conversation. Or how about in Half-Blood Prince when Scrimgeour tries to use Harry as a ministry poster boy? Book Harry doesn't just refuse, he eviscerates the guy. He basically tells the Minister for Magic that he can shove his propaganda where the sun don't shine. And he does it with this cutting precision as well, and Scrimgeour is just left speechless, honestly. Now, to be fair, The Half-Blood Prince is often credited by fans as giving us the most accurate movie Harry in terms of him being sassy and sarcastic. He's witty, he's deadpan. When he takes Felix for Lysis as well, you get that attitude, that like quiet confidence, arrogance almost. And it gives us moments where the real Harry shines through. We get that "I am the chosen one" line, right? And it's the right style of humor. But here's the issue with that movie. Even though the joke is kind of right, it's like the wrong subject matter. Because the thing about Book Harry, he hates being the chosen one. He resents the attention, the pressure, and the fact that everyone expects him to lead a war that he never asked to fight. So when he makes jokes about it, they're kind of bitter and self-deprecating. In the books, I think it's The Order of the Phoenix, Harry makes the joke along the lines of, "I wonder what it would be like to have a difficult life." And that's his sense of humor, right? It's dark, it's sarcastic, and it's aimed at himself. So if Book Harry were to joke about being the chosen one, it would be something like, chosen to what? To have every exam period interrupted by some freak situation that sees me fighting for my life. I didn't say I was witty, okay? He'd be wittier than that. The movie line doesn't quite hit. Like, he's not bragging about his destiny. Like, the arrogance is tongue-in-cheek, but it's not quite the witty, sarcastic humor that Book Harry shows. Like, Book Harry would probably deflect from how much he hates that title, not like celebrate it, you know? And here's what's crucial to understand, right? This side of Harry's personality isn't just quirky character flavor. His wit, his sarcasm, his sharp tongue, these are survival mechanisms. They are the natural result of who he is and what he's been through. Think about it, right? Harry was orphaned as an infant and then raised in an abusive household where he probably learned that words were his only weapon. He couldn't fight back physically against Dudley or Vernon, so he developed a razor-sharp tongue instead. Then you add the fact that he's got a piece of Voldemort's soul living in his head, like the soul of a magical, mass-murdering psychopath, and suddenly his moments of anger and his cutting sarcasm, they make a lot more sense, right? This isn't just Harry being a typical sassy teenager. This is someone who's been shaped by trauma and abuse and literal dark magic. So his humor is how he copes. His anger is a natural response to everything he's been through. And his sharp wit is how he's learned to defend himself in a world that has been hostile to him since birth. So when the movies strip this edge away, they're not just making him more polite, they're kind of erasing the core of what makes him who he is. They're taking away parts of his personality that make sense given his background. And there were so many opportunities for them to show us this. When Rita Skeeter interviews him, his responses in the book are pure gold. When Umbridge tries to humiliate him in class, he gives as good as he gets. Book Harry has an edge. He has bite. When Aunt Marge insults his parents, he doesn't just get upset, he loses control and accidentally inflates her like a balloon. And I know that happens in the movies, but I think because it's in isolation, it seems like one moment where Harry loses control, as opposed to a core part of just who he is as a character. In the Goblet of Fire book, Malfoy calls Hermione a mudblood in the corridor, and Harry immediately tries to curse him. Again, the movies don't give us that scene. It feels like movie Harry has been through sensitivity training, right? But book Harry has been through a war. The movies gave us a hero who was easy to root for, someone who never said anything mean, did anything questionable. Book Harry is compelling precisely because he's not perfect. He's a good person who sometimes says and does cruel things, even to Ron and Hermione, and we'll touch on that later in the video. He's brave, but also reckless, and he's definitely capable of real anger. So book Harry doesn't just stumble into solutions, he figures them out. But movie Harry, he gets a lot of help. And I find this change really frustrating because it fundamentally changes Harry from an active protagonist to a passive recipient of help and other people figuring things out for him. And it happens over and over again through the series. And what's frustrating is that Harry, in moments of being humble and modest, he says that he only succeeds because of luck and help. And in the books, you can argue with him, right? Because he's quick on his feet, he's very capable, he's active in doing the right thing. But in the movies, he's kind of right. Let me explain how, right? In The Philosopher's Stone, who figures out who Nicholas Flamel is and how he's connected to the stone? In the books, it's Harry who makes that connection, right? After weeks of research and thinking and racking his brain because he knows he's heard the name before, and he eventually solves it himself. In the movies, Hermione just happens to have read about him and tells Harry. So suddenly, Harry's first real moment of detective work becomes Hermione's moment instead. But it gets worse, right? In the later films, like the Deathly Hallows, right? Harry needs to find Ravenclaw's diadem. Now, book Harry goes on this incredible journey of deduction, right? He talks to Luna about what Ravenclaw's relic might be. He realizes it's a diadem. He remembers seeing it in the Room of Requirement, connects the dots about when Tom Riddle would have hidden it. And it's this brilliant bit of detective work that shows that Harry has grown into someone who can think strategically and solve complex puzzles. Movie Harry just talks to Luna, who tells him to talk to the Grey Lady, who then basically just gives him directions to the Horcrux. It's just like having Hermione do his homework for him, right? And this pattern of taking these big moments of detective work away from Harry changes something fundamental about his character. Because book Harry isn't just brave, he is smart. Not in the same way that Hermione is smart, but he's got this intuitive intelligence, right? This ability to see patterns and make connections that others miss. Think about how he figures out that Draco is a Death Eater in The Half-Blood Prince. He doesn't have proof, it's just instinct and observation. Now, I know in the past that has let him down. For example, thinking that Snape was going to steal the Philosopher's Stone wasn't quite right. But he's older, he's more mature, he's more experienced, and he notices Draco's behavior, and he puts together the pieces, and he's absolutely right. But because he can't prove it, everyone dismisses him. And actually, in the books, it's a huge part of the plot. He brings it up so often to whoever will listen. In fact, he mentions it to Ron and Hermione countless times, to the point where they actually get a bit irritated with him. But the movies barely touch on this storyline at all. I think he mentions it once to McGonagall and Snape. Maybe there's a second time in the film that I can't remember. But he doesn't seem so sure like he does in the books, and so we lose another great example of Harry's detective skills and his frustration at not being believed. But here's where it really becomes a problem, right? The movies don't just fail to show Harry's intelligence, they actively transfer his smart moments to other characters. And if you've seen my video about how Ron's moments are often taken and given to somebody else, you'll know who usually benefits. It's Hermione, right? And it happens with Harry's moments too. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, who figures out that they need to save Buckbeak and use him to rescue Sirius? In the book, it's Harry. In the movies, Hermione figures it out and has to explain it to him. In the Deathly Hallows, whose idea is it to escape from Gringotts on the dragon? In the book, it's Harry. In the movie, it's Hermione. So look, this isn't just about giving Hermione more to do. It's about fundamentally changing the dynamic of the trio. In the books, all three of them contribute different strengths. Hermione has the knowledge, Ron has the strategic thinking and the Wizarding World insight, and Harry has the intuition and the leadership skills. They are a team and they are very balanced. In the movies, Hermione becomes the brain of the operation, Ron becomes little more than comic relief, and Harry just sort of becomes almost the brawn, like the warrior with very little else. He's the one that goes into the dangerous situations, who ends up in the duels and fighting. So, you know, they keep his bravery, I guess, but bravery without intelligence just kind of makes you a reckless idiot, right? Not a hero. And it seems like the movies thought that making Harry too smart would somehow diminish Hermione's role. But that's completely backwards, right? Book Harry's intelligence doesn't make Hermione less important, it makes their partnership more meaningful. When they're contributing ideas and solutions, they feel like equals. And the tragedy is that Book Harry's intelligence makes his bravery more impressive, right? Not less so. When he chooses to walk into the Forbidden Forest at the end of the Deathly Hallows, he knows he's going to his death. It's not because he's too stupid to think of another way, it's because he's smart enough to understand that this is the only way, and he's brave enough to do it anyway. That's what real heroism looks like, right? Not blind courage, but intelligent courage. Not stumbling into the right choice, but understanding the choice and making it anyway. So movie Harry basically has two emotions, right? Determined and mildly concerned. Whereas book Harry, he has the full human experience. And nowhere is this difference more obvious than in The Order of the Phoenix, where the movies completely sanitized one of the most important aspects of Harry's character development, right? His anger. Because book Harry, in his 5th year, is absolutely furious. And I mean furious, right? He shouts at his best friends, he smashes up Dumbledore's office. And the books don't shy away from showing us just how ugly his anger can get. When Ron and Hermione try to calm him down after he joins them at Grimmauld Place, Harry explodes at them. He starts yelling about how they've been having a grand old time playing secret agents while he's been stuck alone at the Dursleys, not knowing anything. It's not pretty, it's not heroic, it's a 15-year-old boy having a complete breakdown. Now, movie Harry does have moments of raising his voice, okay? But it doesn't really do justice the rage that he feels in the book, particularly with those close to him. Because in this book, he lashes out a lot to the people who he loves and who love him. But the thing is, in the book, his anger isn't really a character flaw, it's a realistic response to trauma. This is a kid who watched his classmate get murdered in front of him, who barely escaped death himself, who came back to a world that called him a liar and a fraud. And on top of that, he's got Voldemort's emotions bleeding into him, making everything he feels 10 times more intense. Of course he's angry, of course he's lashing out. The fact that he's not having a complete psychological breakdown is actually pretty remarkable. Maybe he is having a complete psychological breakdown. Anyway, it feels like the movies were so afraid of making Harry unlikable that they completely missed the point, right? His anger in Order of the Phoenix isn't supposed to make us like him less, it's supposed to make us understand what he's going through. It's supposed to show us the cost of everything that he's endured. And the books don't just show us his anger, they show us his guilt about that anger, right? He knows he's being unfair to his friends. He knows he's taking his frustrations out on people who don't deserve it, but he can't stop himself. And that internal conflict is what makes him so compelling. It even gives us a key moment of his relationship with Ginny. After all that rage, and then the vision of Nagini attacking Arthur, he's worried that he's being possessed by Voldemort, so he starts to isolate himself. And when he does, Ginny challenges him on being a recluse. She shares her experience of being possessed with Voldemort and how Harry almost certainly isn't going through that. And it's a massive turning point in their relationship, and just in building the character of Ginny. Again, I have a video on how the movies kind of ruined that side of Ginny's character too. But Harry's anger in the books bleeds into many of his relationships, right? And they end up being stronger for it. There's this moment after Sirius dies where Harry is so consumed with grief and with rage that he wants to destroy everything in Dumbledore's office. And he does. He screams, he throws things, he completely loses control, and it is raw and it is painful and it's kind of heartbreaking to read. But the movies cut this scene completely. Instead, we get like Harry shedding a single tear and then just sort of moving on quietly. And it's like the films were afraid to show us a hero who is genuinely broken. But it's not just anger, right? Book Harry experiences the full spectrum of human emotions in ways that movie Harry never does. He is genuinely depressed at times. He has moments of real despair where he questions whether any of it's worth it. He feels isolated and alone even when he's surrounded by people who care about him. In The Half-Blood Prince, when he's dealing with the pressure of the prophecy and the weight of knowing that he might have to die, Book Harry has these quiet moments of existential dread. He looks at couples holding hands and wonders if he'll ever get to experience a normal relationship. He watches other students complaining about homework and he envies their ordinary problems. But movie Harry just doesn't have any of these complex, deep, intricate thoughts or feelings. And I know they're all internal, and it's hard for that to translate to screen, but you have to try, right? Because otherwise he ends up feeling like this vapid protagonist who's just going through the motions of the plot without it impacting him or his character or his growth or his journey really as a person. And that's what the movies really missed, I feel like. Book Harry's emotional journey isn't about him learning to control his feelings. It's about him learning to live with them. And that's not just key in his own growth, but in showing what will ultimately give him the strength to defeat Voldemort. You see, Book Harry's breakdown after Sirius dies isn't a moment of weakness, it's a moment of humanity. It's the natural response of someone who's been holding it together for way too long, and he snaps. But it's his ability to eventually pick himself up and keep going that makes him a real human hero. It's not because he's learned to suppress his emotions, it's because he learned that feeling those emotions doesn't make him weak. He feels these things because he has loved and been loved, and he's stronger for having those feelings. Movie Harry kind of suggests that real heroes don't have those messy, complicated emotions, right? But Book Harry proves they do, and that's what makes them heroic. When you change the main character, you don't just change one person, okay? You change the entire story. And that's exactly what happened when the movies flattened Harry's character, because Harry isn't just the protagonist, he's the emotional center of the entire series. His relationships with the other characters are what drives the story forward. And so when you change who he is, you inevitably change how those relationships work. Let's start with the most obvious example, right? His friendships with Ron and Hermione. In the books, Harry has this natural tendency to take charge when things get dangerous, right? Not because he's officially the leader, but because he's the one who feels most responsible for solving problems. When they're trying to protect the Philosopher's Stone, Harry's the one giving out assignments. He tells Hermione, you better do that, when he needs someone to watch Snape. When they need to rescue Ginny, he's the one insisting they go into the chamber. And in the earlier books especially, when Ron and Hermione are constantly bickering, Harry often finds himself caught in the middle, right? Not necessarily as the peacemaker, but as the person that both of them turn to when they're frustrated with each other. And you see, in the books, Harry and Ron have built their relationship up to the point where he understands Ron's insecurities. So he understands where he's coming from, but also why that might make certain things difficult. And so he sort of gets when Ron and Hermione don't really understand each other. He knows when to mediate and also when to take a step back. But movie Harry kind of feels like he's being guided by his friends rather than working alongside them as equals. The movies make it seem like Harry would be completely lost without them, rather than showing his natural leadership instincts and his moral compass drive the group forwards. In the books, he's also close enough to them that he's not afraid to show his angry side. They're like siblings that he will unfairly take his frustrations out on. And Hermione even checks him on it, right? Like a sister would. She tells him off for biting their head off even though they're on his side. The books do a great job of showing how close they all are by allowing them to have moments like this. As we've mentioned, the movies don't really show this aspect of Harry so much, and so we miss the knock-on effect of that into their relationships. But it's not just the trio, right? Harry's relationships with almost every other character get simplified in the movies because they don't really understand who he is. His relationship with Luna, for example, in the books, like he genuinely connects with her because they're both outsiders who've experienced loss and trauma. He doesn't just tolerate her weirdness, he finds comfort in talking to someone who understands what it's like to be different. Their friendship develops naturally over time, built on this mutual understanding and respect. But the movies kind of treat Luna like a quirky side character who occasionally dispenses wisdom. And we lose that sense of genuine connection between two people who have been through things that other people can't understand. Or look at Harry's relationship with Neville, right? In the books, Harry sees something in Neville from early on. Not like potential for greatness necessarily, but someone who deserves kindness and protection. I think there's a part of Harry who sees Neville being the butt of the joke, being picked on and bullied by like Malfoy, but also other Gryffindors. And he sees the way he was bullied himself by Dudley and the Dursleys his whole childhood. So he connects with him, right? He stands up for Neville against Malfoy. He includes him in conversations. He treats him like a friend when other people treat him like a joke. And crucially, book Harry learns from Neville too. He sees how Neville handles adversity with quiet dignity, how he never gives up even when everyone expects him to fail, and Harry takes that on board. In some ways, Neville's courage is more impressive than Harry's because Neville has to work so much harder for every small victory. Now, the movies show us Neville's transformation, but they don't really show us Harry's role in it. They miss how Harry's friendship and belief in Neville contributed to that growth. Harry's relationships, even with minor characters, are key to his own journey, his own development as a character. And that's never more apparent than when he's teaching the DA. Because he teaches the DA not just because they need to learn defense against the dark arts, but because he wants to protect them. He remembers what it felt like to be unprepared, to be scared. From the situation with Quirrell and the Philosopher's Stone, to Riddle and the Diary, and then to the Triwizard Tournament with Voldemort the year before. In the movies, unfortunately, the DA is reduced to montages, which is great for showing progress and the passing of time, but we lose how much of Harry's character growth is tied to this plot. Him nurturing younger students, him coming to his own gradually as a leader, first resenting the fact that Hermione's asked him to do it, or that people expect it from him, but eventually taking pride in the progress that the group makes. Seeing Neville's persistence, Ginny's brilliance. Harry's own growth is rooted in taking those students on that journey, leading them on that journey. And I think it's what really starts his final arc into becoming the one who takes down Voldemort. And then there are the relationships that the movies cut entirely, right? Harry's interactions with Kreacher in the Deathly Hallows is a perfect example of his character growth. After years of disliking Kreacher, Harry finally takes the time to understand the house elf story. He shows Kreacher kindness and respect, and in return, Kreacher becomes one of his most loyal allies at the end of the series. This isn't just about Harry being nice to a house elf, it's about Harry learning to see past his own prejudices, learning to understand that everyone has a story, and it actually works as a fantastic precursor to his final story beat with Snape. Taking the time to look through his memories, to understand somebody who has treated him so poorly, and to understand why and what they've been through, rather than just the knee-jerk reaction of treating them poorly in return. But the movies cut this beautiful storyline with Kreacher, So we lose this amazing moment of growth in Harry. In the same way they cut his final scene with Dudley, where they finally show each other mutual respect, with Dudley thanking Harry for saving his life and they shake hands. And these might seem like small changes, right? But they add up to something much bigger. In the books, Harry's relationships are constantly evolving. He's learning how to be a better friend, a better leader, a better person. He's growing from a lonely, angry child into someone who can inspire others and bring out the best in them, to someone whose reaction to things isn't to fight back necessarily. Through the series, he's so angry and he's witty and sarcastic, as we established, but he grows into a character whose response is to try and find understanding with people, which actually ends up being a much more Dumbledore perspective. You see it when Harry judges Voldemort's mother for abandoning him, and Dumbledore says not to judge her too harshly. Book Harry goes on that journey, but movie Harry's relationships feel static. He starts out as a nice guy who cares about his friends, and he ends as a nice guy who cares about his friends. He doesn't have that real growth, and so we don't have the sense that his experiences fundamentally change how he relates to other people. So why does that matter at all? Because book Harry shows us that you don't have to be perfect to be a hero, right? You just have to choose to be good again and again, even when it's hard. Movie Harry is the hero we think we want, flawlessly noble and naturally kind and gracious, but book Harry is the more realistic, more human hero, and he's much more interesting of a character to follow. So you see, Harry becomes this sort of generic main character, and he loses so much of what makes him interesting as he goes from the boy who lived to the chosen one who takes on Voldemort. And speaking of Voldemort, let's look at our big bad, shall we, and how the movies stripped him of so much that makes him interesting. And yes, we will dive into the missing backstory from the Half-Blood Prince. The version of Voldemort that made it into the movies left a few things out, including some of the most chilling parts of his character. So in this video, I have decided to break down the differences between Voldemort in the Harry Potter books and Voldemort in the Harry Potter movies. Why he's so much more terrifying in the written version of the story, even when he's not doing anything. I'll look at what part of his backstory was cut that changes how we understand him completely, and what small detail made him seem less powerful than he really was. So let's start with how Voldemort carries himself, because the movies changed that quite a lot. In the books, Voldemort is described as moving lazily. He is calm, controlled, deliberate. Even when he's angry, it's a cold fury. He's not shouting or screaming. Take the graveyard scene in The Goblet of Fire. In the book, after Voldemort is resurrected, he just stands there. The Death Eaters come to him. One of them literally crawls up to him, but he barely moves except to raise his wand. In this chapter, the word lazily is used 3 times. But when it comes to the movie version of this scene, he's prowling around the circle of Death Eaters. He's ripping off their masks, constantly gesticulating like he can't control himself. And that's the problem, right? Book Voldemort doesn't need to move. He doesn't need to shout. His presence alone is enough to make people freeze with terror. When he tortures someone in the books, he just raises his wand and whispers, "Crucial." Minimal effort, maximum effect. But movie Voldemort seems like he's working hard. He throws his whole body into casting spells. He makes faces, shouts incantations. It's like he's trying to convince people that he's scary. And that difference is huge, right? Because in the books, other characters are literally afraid to move in Voldemort's presence. They are paralyzed by fear while he remains perfectly still. But the movies flip that, right? They make him the one who's constantly moving, while everyone else just stands around watching. And that makes him so much less intimidating, right? Because what's scarier to you, right? Someone screaming and flailing around, or someone who could destroy you with a whisper. The books also show us glimpses of Voldemort when he was handsome and charming in flashbacks. And being handsome and charming is all part of his manipulation. Look at the scene with Hepzibah Smith in the books, when he's after her treasures. He's polite, flattering, almost seductive, and she's completely taken in by his charm. And then he murders her for Hufflepuff's cup. And then when he tries to get Dumbledore to hire him at Hogwarts, he's putting on this act of being respectful, humble. But then you can really see his frustration when it doesn't work, when Dumbledore sees right through him. And that's key to who he is and to his relationship with Dumbledore, which we'll get into later. But he's charming and he's manipulative, and we see glimpses of this side of him outside of flashbacks too. You know, the need to be charming has sort of gone as he gets older. He's soulless and he rules with fear, but he's still manipulative, right? He's persuasive. He uses emotional language despite being a sociopath who feels nothing. He refers to the Death Eaters when he summons them after his resurrection as his true family, as though there's weight to that, as though family means something to him. him while he desecrates his father's grave. And look, found family can be significant. We've all seen Guardians of the Galaxy. But Voldemort doesn't care about anybody else outside of what they can do for him. That's not family, is it? We see him refer to himself as merciful too. These big emotive words that mean something, that have emotional weight. But the same intensity in movie Voldemort's movement is present in his dialogue as well. To manipulate, there needs to be subtlety, right? But this is lost in the films. The subtlety is gone. Everything is big and over the top and dramatic. His punishments are equally calculated in the books as well. They're equally subtle and controlled. He uses the Cruciatus Curse on his followers at least 3 times throughout the series. Not in a rage, but as a measured punishment. A reminder of what happens when you disappoint him. He humiliates Bellatrix in front of the others when she fails him. He degrades Lucius by taking his wand and then laughing at the idea that Lucius could have his in return. He has the other Death Eaters laughing at him too. He sends Wormtail to live with Snape like he's an unwanted pet. All of this done so publicly. It's still theatrical, but it's a subtle theatric, so the other Death Eaters know they could be next. It's psychological warfare almost. He keeps them loyal through fear, but it's controlled, it's methodical intimidation. But in the movies, we just don't really get much of this. There's the scene where he takes Lucius's wand and he snaps off the eccentric modifications. I think that's quite well done. But largely, we lose a lot of Voldemort's methodical manipulation of his forces, which ultimately detracts from who Voldemort is as a character. The things we've mentioned already, he's cold, controlled, deliberate, methodical. That's the mark of a truly dangerous leader. Someone who knows exactly how much fear to apply and when. But I think the movies lose all of that. There's a hierarchy of power in the wizarding world, and it's key to Voldemort's plans, to Voldemort's ambitions, and to Voldemort's story arc. But the movies mess it up a bit. You see, Voldemort is one of the most powerful wizards of all time, but he fears Dumbledore. And we're told this a few times before we see it. And we see it first in the battle at the Ministry of Magic, right at the end of the Order of the Phoenix. And then we see it again during the flashbacks from Voldemort's life in the Half-Blood Prince. In the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore bests Voldemort in a duel, despite Voldemort pulling no punches, being willing to kill Dumbledore, whereas Dumbledore is operating with one hand tied behind his back. He doesn't want to kill Voldemort, he just wants to stall him until the Ministry arrives. Plus, he's protecting Harry from Voldemort, and despite this, Dumbledore is still winning the duel. Voldemort is powerful, but he's not as powerful as Dumbledore. But he has other weapons in his arsenal, right? He's charming and manipulative. We see him trying to use this on Dumbledore when he applies to the Defense Against the Dark Arts job, but it doesn't work. In fact, Dumbledore reveals that he knows far more about Voldemort's life than Voldemort expected, and he's visibly frustrated by it. So in the books, we see that Voldemort is outmatched and outthought by Dumbledore time and time again. And so it becomes clear why he doesn't directly attack Hogwarts during any of the first 6 books, until Dumbledore is dead. The movies, however, don't get this. The nuance of that relationship is completely lost. I mean, the flashback that we discussed about him applying for a job, having an interview with Dumbledore, that's cut completely. So we never really see Dumbledore show Tom that he won't be manipulated by him. Perhaps we see it briefly in the Chamber of Secrets, but we lose that big instance of it in the Half-Blood Prince. And in the films, the battle in the Ministry isn't weighted in the same way. You know, Voldemort appears to be on the front foot, launching attack after attack at Dumbledore, who constantly looks like he's clinging on for dear life. That hierarchy is toppled. And because they're so evenly matched, it's never clear why Voldemort doesn't just attack Hogwarts. It's never clear why he truly fears Dumbledore. But the other side of the hierarchy is missing too. We need to see how much more powerful he is than pretty much everyone else excluding Dumbledore. In the Battle of Hogwarts, in the books we see Voldemort dueling Kingsley, McGonagall, and Slughorn all at the same time. Like, they are already established as some of the most gifted wizards alive. Kingsley in particular is a master duelist who is often tasked with protecting the Prime Minister. Important people are under his protection because he's that good. But him, alongside McGonagall, who's also great, and Slughorn, who is also great, and Voldemort handles them comfortably. But that's cut from the films entirely, so we don't see this side of him. In fact, we barely see him fighting in the battle at all. He's hanging back at the boathouse with Snape, he's walking up the steps in Hogwarts with nobody really challenging him. Voldemort's place in the hierarchy of most magical wizards to ever live is just told to us in the films. It's never really shown. In fact, the main thing that is shown is we see him constantly being bested by teenagers. Now let's talk about how Voldemort looks, because the movies held back. In the books, Voldemort isn't just pale and bold. He is described as being barely human. Whiter than a skull, with wide, livid scarlet eyes, and a nose that was flat as a snake's with slits for nostrils. His hands are like large pale spiders with unnaturally long fingers. He's skeletally thin with no lips. But the movies, they gave him blue eyes. Ralph Fiennes' regular blue eyes, when those red cat-like eyes were supposed to be one of the most terrifying features of him. And look, yes, they made him pale, they took away his nose, but they just made him look like some weird guy who needs more sun. Not like something that should horrify people on sight. There's also that weird scene in The Order of the Phoenix, right, where he's just wearing a muggle suit. Like Voldemort, the wizard who despises everything non-magical, and they put him in muggle clothing. Like, I know it's not him, he's not actively wearing it, this is like a vision or a dream or something, but it's our first visual sight of Voldemort after his resurrection. They could have made it so much more terrifying. And this matters because Voldemort's appearance in the books is symbolic. It's a physical manifestation of how corrupted his soul has become. Every description emphasizes how he's become less than human through his own terrible choices. And it's not just the big things, it's the details. In the books, he's described as having no discernible lips. The books also emphasize his unnaturally long, spider-like fingers. But in the movies, they're just normal hands. And then there's his wand. In the films, they gave him what looks like a femur, like a bone, which is ridiculous when you think about it. Can you imagine Tom Riddle as an 11-year-old walking out of Ollivander's with a literal body part? Plus, his wand is a key part of his lore, right? His wand is made of yew, and yew trees are literally called death-eating trees. It's where the term Death Eaters comes from. Their berries are poisonous, they used to be planted in graveyards, they take the nutrients up from all the dead in the ground, and it's perfect for Voldemort's lore and his backstory. Plus, his resurrection, the first time we see this wand, is in a graveyard. Would have been perfect, but the movies gave him a bone instead, like a dog. And finally, let's talk about what might be the biggest problem with movie Voldemort, his missing backstory. Like, the movies gave us glimpses, right? A scene in the orphanage, a brief moment with Slughorn, but they cut out the most intriguing parts. The parts that actually explain who Voldemort is and why he became what he became. You know, in the books we get his story, his motivations, his fleshed out journey. We get to know who Tom Riddle is or was from these flashbacks. But by cutting all of this, the movies just keep him stuck as a one-dimensional villain. He's evil because he's evil, nothing deeper. In the books, we learn about the Gaunt family, right? Voldemort's mother, Merope, who was desperate for love, and so she used love potion on Tom Riddle Sr., ran off with him, and when the potion wore off, he abandoned her, left her alone and pregnant. And then she died, giving birth, choosing death over a life without love. And this isn't just backstory, it's key to understanding Voldemort. Like, he was conceived without love, and he goes on to become a dark wizard who can't understand love at all, before ultimately being defeated by love. Like, it's not just a character flaw, it's built into his very existence. But the movies just show us a creepy kid. Like, in the movies, he's charming, he's manipulative, even from a young age. He fooled everyone except Dumbledore. Teachers loved him, students admired him, wanted to be him. He was head boy, he won awards. Nobody suspected he was capable of murder. But in the movies, especially the Half-Blood Prince, he already looks obviously evil, pale, creepy, disturbing. His manipulation isn't subtle. You can literally see the cogs turning in his eyes while he's trying to manipulate Slughorn. And it's really hard to believe that anyone would be fooled by him for 5 minutes, let alone 7 years. And this matters because it changes how we understand Voldemort's rise to power. Book Tom Riddle succeeded because he was a master manipulator. He could make people trust him, to love him even, right up until he destroyed them. Whereas movie Tom Riddle just kind of comes across like a future serial killer, which, you know, he is, but it makes everyone around him seem stupid for not seeing it coming. Without this backstory, movie Voldemort just becomes another generic evil villain. Evil for evil's sake. But book Voldemort is the product of a loveless conception, an abandoned childhood, and choices that stripped away his humanity piece by piece. And that's infinitely more terrifying than just crazy bald guy with a snake face. So Voldemort is reduced in the movies to this generic, far less complex villain. But he and Dumbledore are supposed to be in this league of their own, right? So if Voldemort is watered down in the films, where does that leave Dumbledore? Well, exactly where you'd think. The movies kind of took away a lot of what makes Dumbledore so compelling as well. The Harry Potter films changed a lot from the books. Some storylines were completely cut, some scenes were rearranged, certain characters were completely rewritten. There's one character whose film portrayal fundamentally changed the entire story. And it's the one person who was supposed to be the wisest, calmest figure in the wizarding world.
Harry, you put your name in a goblet of fire.
That infamous scene might be the most obvious example, but it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how wrong the films got Dumbledore's character. So in this video, I will break down the massive differences between book Dumbledore and film Dumbledore, and why these changes matter so much more than you might think. If there's one word that describes Dumbledore in the books, it's calm. No matter what chaos is unfolding around him, Dumbledore remains this steady, unshakable presence. Even when he's angry, it's described as a cold fury, not shouting or raging, something seemingly more controlled, and in my opinion, more intimidating. Take this quote from The Goblet of Fire when Dumbledore discovers that Barty Crouch Jr. has been posing as Mad-Eye Moody all year. There was no benign smile upon Dumbledore's face. No twinkle in the eye behind the spectacles. There was cold fury in every line of the ancient face. A sense of power radiated from Dumbledore as though he were giving off burning heat. And that's Book Dumbledore, right? Powerful, yes, but controlled. He doesn't shout things to be intimidating. His mere presence is intimidating enough. Film Dumbledore is like a completely different character. He doesn't just get angry, he explodes. He grabs students, he yells, he seems constantly on edge, like he's barely keeping it together. In the movies, Dumbledore doesn't just walk into a room, he storms in. He doesn't just speak, he often barks orders. When Trelawney is being sacked by Umbridge, film Dumbledore just awkwardly shouts at the gathered students.
But you all have studying to do.
And it's just something that Book Dumbledore would never do. And even in calmer moments, film Dumbledore sort of lacks that serene, slightly eccentric quality that made the book character so endearing. You see, Book Dumbledore is a man who admits to reading Muggle knitting patterns. He talks about his fondness for chamber music and hot chocolate. He's quirky and whimsical in a way that makes his serious moments all the more powerful by contrast. But film Dumbledore, especially after Michael Gambon took over, is just angry a lot. Even when he's being kind, there still feels like this underlying intensity that feels completely at odds with how the character was written. And the shift in personality doesn't just change Dumbledore, it changes how we view the entire wizarding world. Because in the books, Dumbledore's calmness makes us feel safe. If he's not worried, then maybe things aren't as dire as they seem. But film Dumbledore kind of offers no such comfort. If even he is panicking, what hope does anybody else have? There's often arguments about whether Richard Harris's Dumbledore from the first couple of films could appropriately portray Dumbledore from the later books when things get more intense. And I'll come on to the differences between the actors later in the video. But I actually think the difference in intensity largely comes from the films and how Gambon portrayed Dumbledore. Like, don't get me wrong, there are moments of intensity, but in the books, Dumbledore always seems in control, save for when he drinks the potion in the cave. But by making Dumbledore more aggressive, confronting Harry about the Goblet of Fire, dueling Voldemort in the Order of the Phoenix, there are these moments where Dumbledore should feel in control, but in the films, by making him more aggressive and more volatile, he feels less confident. And suddenly the films have altered the emotional foundation of the story, and they kind of took away, for me, one of the most refreshing aspects of the character, which is the fact that this immensely powerful wizard was also kind and patient and, yes, a little bit weird. But in trying to make him more dramatic, they kind of made him much less interesting. I think a big criticism of the films in general is that they lose a lot of the whimsical nature of the wizarding world, particularly from book 3 onwards. And I understand for a lot of the plot they have to get more intense and more dark. But Dumbledore is a fundamentally whimsical character. Despite being the most powerful wizard alive and carrying the weight of the wizarding world on his shoulders, he kind of maintains this childlike delight in a world of magic around him. Like his first appearance in The Philosopher's Stone, McGonagall has been waiting all day as a cat, deeply concerned about the Potters' deaths and what Voldemort's disappearance means for the wizarding world. And what's Dumbledore's first action? He pulls out this peculiar silver device and starts to click it to extinguish streetlights. And it's almost playful from him. And his first line is, "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall," with a knowing smile, as if they just bumped into each other at a tea party. Rather than the day after the Potters had been murdered and Voldemort had been defeated, he's just a bit playful, right? And this playfulness runs through everything Book Dumbledore does. He announces nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak at the start of Term Feast. He admits to seeing a thick pair of woolen socks when he looks in the Mirror of Erised, though granted he's probably lying. He even confesses to be quite fond of the Bertie Bott's every flavoured beans. And these aren't just throwaway moments, they are central to who Dumbledore is. He's somebody who finds joy and beauty in the small things, despite having seen the darkest side of humanity. He's whimsical because he chooses to be, because he knows how important it is to maintain a sense of wonder in a world that can be cruel. But I just feel like in the films, this aspect of his character is almost completely erased. Like, Richard Harris captured some of Dumbledore's gentle humour in the first 2 films, but after Michael Gambon took over, any sense of whimsy kind of vanished. And I'm not saying it's Michael Gambon's fault, it could be because of the director or the writing. The producers might have decided they wanted the films to go in a darker, more mature direction. But Gambon became this Dumbledore who was stern and serious and perpetually stressed. It felt like the twinkle in his eye had been replaced with a furrowed brow. The gentle smile replaced by this tight-lipped grimace. And like I say, it's not just Gambon or Dumbledore's character. The films as a whole got darker at this point, and so that all seemed to compound the changes to Dumbledore's character. Chris Columbus departed, the plot got a little bit more intense. Although, did they? The Chamber of Secrets is still quite intense. It's about trying to murder Muggleborns all year. Either way, all of these things together seem to compound the changes to Dumbledore's character. The filmmakers seem to have decided that a powerful wizard can't also be silly or eccentric. They traded Dumbledore's delightful oddness for a more conventional portrayal of wisdom and authority. But in doing so, it felt like they lost something essential about the character. We never see Dumbledore humming to himself as he walks the halls. We never see him offering students lemon drops or making amusing observations about knitting patterns. And I don't want to be overdramatic, but it feels like losing this whimsical side of Dumbledore doesn't just make him less fun, it makes him less complex. Like, his eccentric side exists in perfect balance with his power and his wisdom in the books. And it kind of humanizes him, right? It makes his serious moments more impactful by contrast. And it reminds us that even in trying times, there is still room for joy and silliness. In dark times, Dumbledore chooses to turn on the light. But by stripping away those essential parts of his personality, the films just gave us a Dumbledore who was a bit more bleak, less nuanced, and kind of less magical than the book version of Dumbledore. A character who embodied the wonder of the wizarding world sort of just became another stern old man with a long beard. Now, I think one of the most glaring differences between book Dumbledore and film Dumbledore comes during the battle at the Department of Mysteries, when he's dueling against Voldemort. I think this scene, in the movies versus the books, fundamentally changes how we understand Dumbledore's power compared to Voldemort's. And it's, again, another example of how the films kind of diminish his character. So in the book, when Dumbledore arrives at the Ministry, he's a force of nature. He instantly and basically single-handedly subdues multiple Death Eaters without breaking a sweat. Like, the rest of the Order have been there dueling these other Death Eaters for a while, and the balance of the battle ebbs and flows in one direction or the other. And the Order and the Death Eaters are full of very powerful, very capable wizards and witches. And then Dumbledore just turns up and seemingly very easily rounds up the Death Eaters, ties them up, leaves them for the Ministry to go and find and arrest. It genuinely feels like it's child's play to Dumbledore. And the text is describing him as radiating power. And you can see why, as soon as he shows up, Harry is so relieved. He feels like the embodiment of hope itself. And putting him on that pedestal, showing us that power, shows us why Voldemort fears him, and shows us why losing him in the Half-Blood Prince is so diminishing to the good guys, to their efforts against Voldemort. And then when he duels Voldemort directly in the Department of Mysteries, there is kind of no question who has the upper hand. Here's how the book describes it. Dumbledore flicked his own wand. The force of the spell that emanated from it was such that Harry, though shielded by his golden guard, felt his hair stand on end as it passed. And this time, Voldemort was forced to conjure a shining silver shield out of thin air to deflect it. Throughout their duel, Dumbledore is calm and composed and in control. He even addresses Voldemort as Tom, reinforcing his authority over his former student. He's not just matching Voldemort spell for spell, he is dominating the fight while simultaneously protecting Harry. And when Voldemort asks, "You do not seek to kill me, Dumbledore," Dumbledore's response is chilling. "We both know there are other ways of destroying a man, Tom." And he says this while walking towards Voldemort, quote, as though he had not a fear in the world. And this fight scene establishes something crucial. Dumbledore is the only wizard Voldemort truly fears, and for good reason. He's not just powerful, he's more powerful than Voldemort. He's just trying to occupy Voldemort until the Ministry arrives and sees that he has in fact returned. Dumbledore is pulling his punches, but still comfortably handling this immensely powerful dark wizard. There are these moments in the Spider-Man comics where we realize Spider-Man pulls his punches 99% of the time because he knows he'd just kill everybody if he punched them with all of his might. And this feels exactly like the same thing from Dumbledore. In the movie, the battle between Dumbledore and Voldemort feels far more evenly matched. Dumbledore, in fact, spends most of the fight on the defensive, barely keeping up with Voldemort's attacks. When Voldemort sends a massive fire snake at him, Dumbledore looks genuinely afraid. There is none of that calm confidence that we get in the book. Instead, film Dumbledore feels like he's fighting for his life, desperately trying to hold his ground and keep Harry protected, against what is at least an opponent on the same level, if not superior. And this really changes the power dynamic between the two characters. In the books, we can understand why Voldemort never dared attack Hogwarts while Dumbledore was still alive. He just knew he couldn't win. But in the movies, it's far less clear. If they're so evenly matched in a one-on-one, why would Voldemort hesitate? Why wouldn't Voldemort enter Hogwarts at the end of The Half-Blood Prince, catching Dumbledore off guard and killing him himself? And I think this shift has massive implications for the story. Book Dumbledore's power gave readers a sense of security. As long as Dumbledore was around, Harry and Hogwarts were safe. And so when he dies in The Half-Blood Prince, that security is shattered. It makes his death all the more devastating, and it raises the stakes for the final book by 1,000 times. In the books, Dumbledore maintains this delicate balance between mentor and manipulator. He guides Harry while also setting him up for his eventual self-sacrifice. He cares deeply for Harry, but he also views him as a piece in the larger game against Voldemort. And this creates a fascinating tension that culminates in their conversation at King's Cross, where Dumbledore finally confesses his mistakes and his shortcomings. "I cared about you too much," Dumbledore tells Harry. "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth, more for your peace of mind than my plan, more for your life than the lives that might be lost if the plan failed." And this admission feels authentic, because we've seen this conflict play out across 7 books. We've seen Dumbledore keeping secrets from Harry while simultaneously show him kindness and understanding. But film Dumbledore's relationship with Harry kind of lacks this nuance. I mean, we obviously keep coming back to it. The Goblet of Fire scene, when Harry's name comes out of the goblet. In the book, Dumbledore asks Harry calmly if he put his name in there, showing that even in this moment of crisis, he trusts Harry enough to give him a fair hearing. In the film, Dumbledore physically intimidates Harry, showing no trust and no respect whatsoever. Then there's that scene in the Half-Blood Prince film, where Dumbledore asks Harry about his relationship with Hermione.
Well, I notice you spend a great deal of time with Miss Granger. I can't help wondering if...
Oh, no. I mean, she's brilliant, and we're friends. But no.
Forgive me. I was merely being curious.
This scene doesn't exist in the books, and it shows a Dumbledore who's weirdly invasive about Harry's personal life, and also showing he's completely in the dark when it comes to Harry and his relationships. In the films, it's played for laughs, right? But it feels completely at odds with the dignified, respectful way that book Dumbledore treats Harry. In fact, sticking with the Half-Blood Prince, one of the biggest criticisms the movie gets is that it cut out Voldemort's backstory. The book gives us loads of information about Voldemort's formative years, his motivations, and often when people criticize that, it's that it takes away from Voldemort's character. The way it tells these stories is through private lessons between Harry and Dumbledore, exploring past memories together, picking apart clues and suggestions, drawing conclusions. Dumbledore in these scenes is not only connecting with Harry one-on-one, which gives us a great glimpse into a new aspect of their relationship, but it also shows his respect for Harry, almost him seeing him as an equal in this fight against Voldemort. And so in these scenes, he's seemingly passing the torch, especially because later we find out that Dumbledore knows he's going to die soon because he's orchestrated it himself. And knowing that, he clues Harry up on the plan. So cutting these scenes from the film not only cuts the scenes that are important to Voldemort's character, but also hugely important to Harry and Dumbledore's relationship. And the pinnacle of their relationship in the books is the King's Cross scene in the Deathly Hallows, where Dumbledore finally explains everything to Harry with complete honesty. And it's this beautiful, emotional payoff to their very complicated relationship, especially in a book through which, without Dumbledore being around and without Dumbledore's guidance, Harry's faith in him has started to waver, and his trust in Dumbledore and his plan has really been called into question. In the film, we don't get those nuances of Harry questioning Dumbledore so much, and the scene at King's Cross is drastically shortened, losing so much of its emotional impact and failing to really resolve certain tensions between them. And I think by mishandling this crucial relationship, the film's missed an opportunity to show one of the most interesting dynamics in the series. The complicated bond between a flawed mentor and the boy he's trying simultaneously to protect and prepare for death. They turned a relationship defined by mutual respect, complicated by secrets, into something far more simplistic and ultimately less meaningful. So when we talk about the differences between book Dumbledore and movie Dumbledore, we cannot ignore the physical aspects of the character. How he looks, how he moves, how he carries himself. Book Dumbledore wears flamboyant, colourful robes. Purple, midnight blue, spangled with stars. His fashion sense is decidedly eccentric. And when he tries to dress as a muggle in The Half-Blood Prince, he wears a velvet suit in plum colour. He's someone who takes joy in expressing himself through his appearance. It's like an extension of the whimsical side of Dumbledore that we've mentioned plenty in this video. And I do think Richard Harris's version of Dumbledore captured some of this, with his flowing robes and his gentle demeanour, but he also portrayed Dumbledore as a bit more physically frail than he's described as being in the books. I don't know if that was a stylistic choice or if Harris was just a little bit older and a little bit more frail. You can't really imagine Richard Harris's Dumbledore dueling Voldemort or sprinting across the Hogwarts grounds. Gambon's Dumbledore had more physical energy, but it kind of lost the serenity and the flamboyance, right? His costumes became increasingly dull. Gone were the colourful, starry robes, replaced by boring greys and dull silvers. And his movements weren't those of someone who glides gracefully through a room, but of someone who's like constantly tense and ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. There's a moment in The Prisoner of Azkaban where Gambon's Dumbledore absent-mindedly just pats Ron on his injured leg in the hospital wing. And it causes Ron pain, he grimaces, and it's played for laughs again. But it shows a Dumbledore who's careless with his physicality, who doesn't move with the deliberate grace of his book counterpart. And the way he uses his wand in the movies is different too. In the books, Dumbledore's wand work is described as being elegant and precise. When he duels, it's with minimal movement, but maximum effect. But in the films, particularly the later ones, when we see Dumbledore wave his wand, it's wild and it's huge, as if he's physically exerting himself to generate magical power. And the physical differences aren't just aesthetic, they fundamentally change how we perceive Dumbledore's character. Book Dumbledore is deliberate and always in control, and it sort of reinforces his wisdom. His colourful appearance matched by his whimsical personality. He's this agile, dexterous wizard who holds all of this power beneath this grandfatherly exterior. And so with the upcoming HBO series on the horizon, there's an opportunity to get Dumbledore right this time. To give us a Dumbledore who can face down Voldemort with calm confidence, who will happily offer a student a lemon sherbet. A Dumbledore who treats Harry with both the care of a guardian and the respect of a fellow warrior. A Dumbledore whose eyes really do twinkle beneath his half-moon spectacles. In the words of Dumbledore himself, it does not do to dwell on dreams. But I certainly am dwelling on the dream of a more book-accurate Dumbledore in the HBO series. So we've kind of done the main 5 from the Harry Potter story, right? But so much of Harry's story is propped up by the supporting characters. You know, the other teachers, the other students, the people in the DA. And I think the character who maybe loses the most in the movies is Neville Longbottom. Because he has major plots around him, right? Huge vulnerable moments. The stuff with his parents, the fact he could have been the chosen one, and it all fuels his character growth. But the movies barely give us a drop in the ocean. Neville Longbottom is integral to the Harry Potter story. He's the epitome of a Gryffindor. He goes through arguably the biggest and best character development of anyone in the series. And even though he does hit those major plot points of his character growing in the movies, they miss out so much of the substance behind it all. Like so much of the nuance and the depth that makes his character so important, makes those moments, like killing Nagini, so significant, are just lost. They're cut completely. And so Neville in the movies ends up being a shell of the character that he is in the books. So let's dive into the Neville we could have had, and how the movies lost the heart of perhaps the most heartfelt character in the wizarding world. So the movies completely gutted Neville's backstory. Like, we get hints at it in the books before it's laid out for us. First, in the Goblet of Fire, after Harry hears reference to the Longbottoms in the Pensieve, and then in more detail in the Order of the Phoenix, where we get this absolutely heartbreaking scene. Harry, Ron, Hermione, they're visiting Arthur Weasley at St. Mungo's Hospital, and they run into Neville. And Neville is clearly uncomfortable. He's a little bit defensive, almost thinking they're gonna make fun of him for being there. And then they realise who he's visiting. His parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, 2 of the most respected auras of their time, who were tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange, and by Barty Crouch Jr., and a few other Death Eaters. The Cruciatus Curse, the Torture Curse, was used on the Longbottoms so much, they were tortured for information about Voldemort after he'd already fallen, and the Death Eaters just didn't stop. They kept going until Frank and Alice had completely lost their minds. And so here's Neville, visiting them in the permanent ward at St. Mungo's, where they will live for the rest of their lives, and they are unable to recognise their own son. The scene is utterly devastating to read. Neville's mother gives him a gum wrapper, right? Just this small, meaningless piece of rubbish, but Neville puts it in his pocket. And his grandmother makes this comment about how he's probably got enough of them to wallpaper his whole bedroom, which means this probably happens every time he visits them, maybe multiple times because they can't remember they've already given him one. Every visit, his mother gives him one of these wrappers, and Neville keeps them all. Neville seemed worried that he thought they were going to laugh at him for being there, and Harry thinks to himself after he sees it, He's never seen anything less funny in his life. It's this moment that really gives us a glimpse into Neville's life outside of Hogwarts. The heartbreak that is his day-to-day life and his relationship with his parents. But there's also a pressure to it, right? The books give us these other moments where we see Neville receiving this pressure from his grandmother. Augusta Longbottom constantly reminds him that he needs to be more like his father, pushing him to be an aura, comparing him to Frank, never quite letting Neville be his own person. That's why he ends up using his father's wand for the first 5 years that he's at Hogwarts. His grandmother gave it to him. And it might feel like a nice family heirloom, but it also feels kind of like a symbolic burden, especially if the person constantly comparing yourself to your father is the one who gave you his wand. Like, here's your father's wand. Be like your father. Live up to your parents' legacy. But the thing with wands is that the wand chooses the wizard, and this wand did not choose Neville. You know, if it was an heirloom and he could just keep it as a keepsake, but had his own actual wand that had chosen him that he could use, fair enough. But she didn't. She made him use it. And it feels, reading about it, like she's saying that he might not be enough on his own, as just Neville. So maybe this wand will make him more like his father. McGonagall hints at that in The Half-Blood Prince, right? She tells Neville his grandmother should be proud of the grandson that she has. And so, with all of that pressure and a wand that wasn't supposed to be his, of course Neville struggled. Of course he seemed incompetent. He was literally using the wrong tool for 5 years, while his grandmother reminded him he wasn't good enough. He wasn't who she wanted him to be. And in the books, when we find these things out, 4, 5 years in maybe, we realise that Neville doesn't really talk about this with his peers, with his friends, with the people in his house. He keeps it all to himself, which makes the burden even heavier, right? He's carrying all of this alone. And it's not just a small secret, this is heart-wrenching stuff. And here's the thing, the scene at St. Mungo's in the books happens right before the mass breakout from Azkaban, right before Bellatrix Lestrange, the woman who tortured his parents, escapes and is out on the loose. And in the books, this is Neville's turning point. This is when something clicks, when he goes from being this nervous, fumbling student to working harder than everybody else in Dumbledore's army. Because the person who destroyed his family just escaped, and he is not going to let that stand. That's a whole lot of depth and meat to sink your teeth into with Neville's character. But in the movies, we get none of it. There's no St. Mungo scene, there's no gum wrapper, there's no glimpses at the pressure from his grandmother. Instead, we just get like a brief conversation in the Order of the Phoenix where Neville tells Harry, very matter-of-factly, that his parents were tortured by Death Eaters. And that's it. That's all the emotional weight we get. Just a 30-second exposition dump. For movie-only viewers, without the context of the tragedy and the pressure and the hand-me-down wand, Neville is just this clumsy kid who happens to have a sad backstory that's mentioned in passing. They don't see his family, his parents. They don't see the gum wrapper. They don't understand the weight that he's carrying, the constant pressure from Augusta, the grief of having parents who are alive but completely gone. And because they cut this scene and these moments, they also end up cutting the connection between Bellatrix's escape and Neville's transformation. Because in the books, it's clear, Bellatrix escapes and Neville becomes absolutely relentless in his training. But in the movies, we don't get that motivation. That link isn't apparent. And so without that reason for his growth, when he suddenly becomes competent later on, it kind of feels a bit random, right? Like the filmmakers just decided, oh, Neville, who couldn't do a simple spell before, he could be useful now. And by cutting all this, they also completely miss how Neville's tragedy really mirrors Harry's, but in some ways it's worse. Because Harry lost his parents, which is devastating, but he has closure, right? He knows they died protecting him, he knows they loved him, and he can remember them through like photos and stories, and eventually through the Resurrection Stone. But Neville's parents are still alive. He can visit them, but they don't know who he is. They can't tell him they love him. They can't tell him they're proud. For me personally, one of my grandparents had dementia, and it is gut-wrenching, seeing somebody you love who struggles to place who you are, talking to you like you're a stranger, struggling to have conversations with you, and eventually your memories of them, it's hard to picture them beyond that person who struggles and doesn't know you. It's hard to remember the person they were before their mind is taken like that. And obviously for Neville, he never really knew his parents in any other way. And the books kind of show the devastation of that perfectly. Like them not grasping who Neville is, but still having this underlying fondness, this innate love. Giving him that wrapper is Alice's way of doing what she can to show those feelings she has, even if she doesn't quite know why. And Neville clinging to it, and having gone through it over and over again, not letting go. It's a real shame the movies cut it, from a character perspective, but also just because it's this beautiful, emotional, harrowing, delicate scene. And then coming back to the pressure from his grandmother, it comes full circle kind of beautifully in another moment that the movies cut, right? In the books, Augusta Longbottom shows up for the Battle of Hogwarts, and when someone asks where Neville is, she says, that he's fighting, and her tone is absolute pride. And then she scurries off to join him. Like this woman who spent years telling Neville he wasn't good enough, who compared him to his father constantly and made him feel inadequate, she finally sees him for who he really is, and she is so proud. Like in the books, we get this rich, tragic, layered backstory for Neville. But in the movies, instead of understanding why Neville is the way he is, and understanding the nuance of his character arc, and understanding each stage of his development, movie audiences just get Neville's parents were tortured. Anyway, and it's such a shame because this backstory is essential to understanding Neville's character, it's essential to understanding his bravery, it's essential to understanding why he becomes the leader that he does in the Deathly Hallows, when he leads that rebellion. Without it, he's kind of just the comic relief character who randomly becomes cool and badass at the end. So we alluded to it when we were talking about Neville's backstory, but it cannot be underestimated how much the movies did Neville dirty when it comes to showing his growth, right? Because they just don't do any justice to the growth he goes through. Because, right, largely in the movies, Neville does have the same big character beats, right? In the Philosopher's Stone, he stands up to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. He doesn't want Gryffindor to lose points. He's brave, and Dumbledore gives him points for that. And later, we see him struggling with his boggart, losing passwords, a little bit of a country bumpkin. But then we see him working hard in the DA. We see him dueling in the Department of Mysteries, and later monologuing against Voldemort before destroying Nagini, the final Horcrux, and helping defeat Voldemort once and for all. But the beauty of a good story is not just moving through the plot. Otherwise, every book would just be like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And there would be no, like, internal monologue, or thought processes, or emotional struggles. You need emotional beats around your story beats, so that you can believe your characters are human, with deep and meaningful motivations. There's this huge one, right? We've mentioned how Bellatrix's breakout spurred Neville on with his training in the DA. But at the Department of Mysteries, he's confronted by Bellatrix. They come face to face, and Neville has to look into the face of the woman who tortured his parents into insanity. Not only that, but later in the same battle, she uses the same spell on him. She casts Crucio on Neville during the battle. The very unforgivable curse that broke his parents' minds from the very woman who did it. And the emotional weight of that moment is huge. It's heartbreaking, it's intense. It's crucial to Neville's development because Bellatrix's outbreak spurred him on, and now he is fighting her. But the movies don't give any emotional weight to these moments whatsoever, and it's a theme. We completely lose the humanity behind Neville's journey. We see him training and getting better in the DA, we see him dueling in the battle at the Department of Mysteries, but we lose the deep emotional aspects of why. We lose the weight of it all. We see Neville being presented with the sword of Gryffindor before using it on Nagini, but the emotional story of having him truly personify his house, of really earning that moment he pulls the sword, it's completely lost. All of the growth, all of the pressure, all of the hardships that he had to overcome to become that character, they're lost. And so it feels abrupt. Still a cool moment, but it's not as jaw-dropping, heart-in-your-mouth, oh my god, like it is in the books. Like the way they cut out the pressure from his grandmother means we don't understand the significance of him getting his own wand and going on that upturn. The way they cut the battle at the Department of Mysteries means we don't see Neville being the last one standing alongside Harry after Ginny and Luna and Hermione and Ron have been injured or fought or knocked out. The way they cut the scene with his parents in St. Mungo's, and the way they cut the scene where his grandmother arrives for the final battle, beaming with pride that Neville is a leader, we lose the significance of that whole journey. And so the movies, though they do give us that journey for Neville, it feels really vapid and empty. He goes from being a bit timid and useless to being brave and strong and standing up, but it just feels kind of soulless, at least compared to the journey in the books and the setbacks and seeing him work for it and overcoming emotional mountains to get to who he becomes. The movies just don't take us on that journey, and so the destination doesn't mean as much. And actually, I feel like a big part of Neville's journey is that it's not about him becoming someone else, someone his grandmother can be proud of. It's about becoming who he always was, but overcoming some external pressure and also his own self-doubt to get there. There are a few other pieces of Neville's character that the movies skip. They are maybe not quite as deep or as heavy, but they do make Neville feel like a richer, more full, and more real character. Because the movies kind of present Neville as a lovable idiot, right? He's clumsy, a little bit stupid, a little bit useless, but his heart is in the right place. But the books show Neville to have some really key skills. Like, we're told very early in the books that Neville is good at herbology. And interestingly, having mentioned the whole thing with the wand, where he's not using one that chose him, herbology is one of the few subjects where Neville doesn't need a wand. Like, he doesn't need one for potions either, but Snape kind of puts a blocker in the way of any chance of Neville being remotely good or comfortable enough to excel there. But when it comes to plants, Neville isn't held back by pressures of being good at magic like his dad. He isn't held back by using somebody else's wand or the fear of his teacher. He's confident. He does well. In the first book, we are told that Neville's high herbology mark makes up for his low potions mark. In the Chamber of Secrets, Neville passing out from the mandrakes only happens in the movie, which frustratingly completely undermines his herbology abilities, which are there from the beginning. He doesn't just get good after the whole thing with Moody and the Goblet of Fire. Speaking of which, in the fourth book, Neville mentions that Professor Sprout had told Moody that he was really good at herbology. And though, unlike in the movie, he's not the one to give Harry the gillyweed, it's still obvious that he's good with plants. In the Order of the Phoenix book, he talks emphatically about Mimbulus Mimbletonia, this rare plant that not even the Hogwarts greenhouses have, and how excited he is to show Professor Sprout. And then in the Half-Blood Prince, we find out that he got an outstanding in herbology in his OWLs. Like, Neville is really bloody good at herbology, and it's such a tiny detail for the movies to add, but they just don't. And taking away Neville's one true strength, his biggest competence all the way through, even when he's struggling with confidence, that's his one thing, and so you're just portraying him as losing passwords and falling off his broom and passing out from mandrakes and getting hung up by pixies on chandeliers. It kind of stops him feeling like a real, full human person, and he just sort of becomes a caricature, right? Like a cartoon character with just one aspect of his personality: being a fool. So come the end of the series, when the epilogue tells us he's the herbology teacher, or if you, God forbid, went to watch The Cursed Child and found out that way, it kind of makes sense if you've read the books, but if you've only seen the movies, feels a little bit random. There's maybe one line in The Goblet of Fire where Moody says, "I hear you're quite good at herbology," and that's it. Because in the movies, actually, the only time we see Neville really interacting with plants is when he passes out from the mandrakes in the greenhouses in the Chamber of Secrets. There is one other huge strength that Neville shows through the books, right? And that is his emotional intelligence. Because for all of his issues with magic and academia and socially, Neville is still kind and empathetic from the very beginning. There's a small moment in The Philosopher's Stone that shows this side of Neville. So he's been cursed by Malfoy, he's being humiliated in the corridors by this school bully, and Harry gives him a chocolate frog. And it's a way to raise Neville's spirits, which kind of mirrors what happens to Harry when the Dementors get him and Lupin gives him chocolate in the third book. But when it comes to this moment with Neville and Harry, Harry has given Neville a chocolate frog, and I think for a lot of us, if we were Neville, we'd be so inside our own head. We'd be embarrassed, we'd be upset, humiliated, not really thinking much beyond how sorry we feel for ourselves. But Neville offers Harry back the chocolate frog card from the chocolate frog he gave him. He says, "Thanks, Harry, I think I'll go to bed. Do you want the card? You collect them, don't you?" And it's this small moment, but to remember that about Harry anyway. Like, this is their first year at Hogwarts. They've met so many different people who all have different interests, different families, and different things to try and remember about all these people. So to remember this little detail about Harry is so conscientious. But also, like I said, he's just been humiliated. His anxiety is probably at an all-time high, and he still recalls this about Harry, and he still wants to give him back that card. It's such a lovely moment that proves to be a foundation of Neville's character. And we see that constantly through the series. There are moments between Harry and Neville, and in Neville's actions as well, particularly in the Order of the Phoenix. Like when Seamus is saying he doesn't believe Harry and Dumbledore, the movies only show us Ron standing up for Harry, but Neville does it too in the books. And at the end of the Order of the Phoenix, Neville is willing to risk his life to save Sirius, because he trusts Harry. But as far as Neville is concerned, just like the rest of the Wizarding world, Sirius is still a mass-murdering psychopath on the run. But for Neville, Harry wanting to save him is enough. So Neville goes along, and he's willing to risk his life. Again, a small detail that's not even really hinted at in the movies. But that's the thing, through the books, Neville has all of these incredible, redeeming aspects to his character, and the movies just don't show them. And so when he gets his glow up, it just feels abrupt and unearned. Alright, let's talk about one of the most fascinating aspects of Neville's character. Something that adds so much weight to his story, and the movies cut it pretty much completely. It's the prophecy, right? In the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore reveals something huge to Harry. The prophecy that Voldemort was so desperate to hear, the one that set everything in motion, could have been about Neville, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. Harry was born at the end of July, the 7th month. So was Neville. Harry's parents defied Voldemort 3 times. So does Neville's. Both families fit the criteria. Both boys could have been the chosen one. But Voldemort chose Harry. He decided the prophecy was about the Potters, not the Longbottoms. And by going after Harry, by trying to kill him, by giving Lily the chance to step aside, and her choosing to die anyway, Voldemort marked Harry as his equal. And that's what made Harry the chosen one. Not fate, not destiny, Voldemort's choice. And in the books, Dumbledore explicitly tells Harry this. He says Voldemort himself would mark him as his equal. He explains that it could have been Neville, but Voldemort chose Harry, and in doing so, created his own enemy. And all of this is huge because it means that Neville's story runs parallel to Harry's. It means that in another world, in another timeline, Neville could have been the boy who lived. And it also means that all of the heartache that Neville has with his parents who weren't killed, but were tortured into insanity, that could have ended up being Harry's experience with his parents. The movies, of course, didn't mention this in the slightest, but in the books, it adds this incredible weight to everything Neville does, because he's living in the shadow of what could have been. And this theme that runs through the later part of Harry Potter is that choices matter more than fate. And Neville is living proof that prophecies aren't absolute. It was a choice that made Harry the chosen one, not fate. And there's a few aspects of that I want to talk about. The first one is that there's this incredible undercurrent to Neville's rise as this brave, heroic Gryffindor who was instrumental in taking down Voldemort by starting the Hogwarts Rebellion and eventually striking down the final Horcrux. Because he's sort of fulfilling that destiny as the chosen one, even though he wasn't the one who was chosen. But the movies, of course, don't touch any of this. They don't give us that final scene in the Order of the Phoenix where Harry and Dumbledore debrief about everything the prophecy means. They don't let us sit with the weight of the situation that means Harry either has to kill or be killed to end it all. And most of all, for Neville's character, they don't mention that Neville could have been the chosen one at all. And that's a shame because the parallel between their stories is so important. Because there's this whole dynamic for a while after the fallout of the Order of the Phoenix where Harry feels like he has to stand against Voldemort because the prophecy says so. He is the chosen one, it is predetermined. But then that conversation towards the end of the Half-Blood Prince where Dumbledore makes it so clear that the prophecy itself is meaningless when it comes to Harry standing against Voldemort. Dumbledore explains to Harry that, of course he has to stand against Voldemort, but not because of the prophecy, but because he knows that Harry will never rest until he's done it. Because it's the thing that must be done, whether that's to help the wizarding world or to avenge his parents. And this conversation is essential to where we position Neville, because once we've learned that the prophecy is mostly meaningless, besides the fact that it forced Voldemort's hand, we understand what matters is choosing to do what's right, and choosing to stand against Voldemort, not because of Trelawney's prediction, but because that's what must be done. And so, despite Neville not being the one marked by Voldemort as his equal, despite Neville not being chosen by Voldemort as the chosen one, he still chooses to stand against Voldemort, because it's the right thing to do. Because as Dumbledore correctly points out about Harry, Neville is the same. He won't rest until what needs to be done has been done. And that's proof when he gives his monologue at the end, right? So it comes full circle. Once the prophecy is proven to be meaningless, Neville becomes as essential to the final victory as Harry is, standing up to Voldemort even when he thinks Harry is dead, destroying Nagini. Oh, it's such an incredible, nuanced journey for the character. And the movies play down the entire prophecy storyline. They take all of this depth and this meaning and this subtext from all of these moments and they just cast it aside. And it's such a shame. There's this moment in the books before Harry goes to the forest to face Voldemort. In the movies, at this moment, he speaks with Ron and Hermione. But in the books, he doesn't. He speaks to only one person, and that's Neville. Not including the people that the Resurrection Stone brings back to speak to him. He pulls Neville aside and he tells him that Nagini has to die, that someone needs to kill the snake. And he's trusting Neville to make sure it happens. And this is huge, right? Because Harry is about to sacrifice himself. He's about to walk to his death. And the last thing he does is make sure Neville, of all people, knows what needs to be done. Because he trusts Neville. He knows Neville won't give up. He won't back down. He will find a way to kill that snake no matter what. And Neville does. When Voldemort thinks he's won, when he's trying to get Neville to join the Death Eaters, Neville refuses. He even has to endure the sorting hat being forced onto his head and burst into flames. And after all of that, he eventually pulls the sword from the hat and kills Nagini with it, the final Horcrux. This is the boy who could have been the chosen one, destroying the final Horcrux, making it possible for Harry to finally kill Voldemort. And it's poetic and it's perfect. It's the culmination of Neville's entire arc. Everything he was, everything he could have been, and everything he is now coming together for this moment. From frightened first year to the man who makes the killing blow possible. But in the movies, there is no conversation between Harry and Neville. There is no beautiful context around Neville's role in taking down Voldemort. And it's just all shallow plot points occurring without the depth and the nuance and the heart behind it. Which is largely how the movies treated Neville across the whole series. So Neville, one of Harry's fiercest supporters, was really watered down in the movies. And it's a shame because in the books, I think he has one of the most compelling journeys of any character, from where he started to where he ended up. But another character who also goes on a huge journey in the books is Draco Malfoy. From pompous school bully to one of Voldemort's youngest Death Eaters who ends up in way over his head. And this is how the movies gave us a much less compelling version of his story. Draco Malfoy is the school bully. He is rich, pompous, arrogant, and he's cruel. He revels in causing pain and torment for the other students who don't fall in line with him and his worldview. Now, if you've only seen the movies, you might not know the extent of that. You might see him as this scared little boy who was out of his depth, right? Forced down a path by his father until he literally had no way out. But the books give us a much deeper look at the choices he makes and who Draco himself chooses to be from the first time we meet him. But the movies softened him, they sympathized with him, and they turned him into a character that he never really was. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the differences between book Draco and movie Draco, and why he's much worse in the books than people realize. So let's start with how Draco carries himself, because this is one of the biggest differences. So in the books, Draco is cocky from day one. When Harry first meets him at Madame Malkin's robe shop in Diagon Alley, Draco is bragging about bullying his father into buying him a racing broom, and how he'll smuggle it into school. And Harry literally thinks that Draco reminds him of Dudley. That's the first impression. Dudley is pretty much the worst person Harry knows at this point, and Draco reminds him of him. And that confidence that Draco shows never wavers, right? Take the scene on the Hogwarts Express in the Philosopher's Stone. Because in the books, this is where Harry first meets him, when Draco enters Harry's compartment with Crabbe and Goyle, and he says, "Is it true? They're all saying down the train that Harry Potter is in this compartment, so it's you, is it?" And then he immediately starts trash-talking Ron's family, and how Harry needs to make friends with the right sort. And this is just pure arrogance, from like a schoolyard bully who believes that pure blood supremacy is the way wizards will move forward. And you know, when Harry refuses his friendship, he just gets nastier. But the movie version cuts that first meeting on the train completely, and instead we see him at Hogwarts before the sorting ceremony. And it feels much less confrontational than the scene on the train, right? Because on the train, Draco has sought Harry out. But in the movie, the kids are just clustered there waiting to be sorted. And so we lose the immediate establishment of who Draco is, this confident bully who seeks people out to push his ideas onto them, who believes he's superior to everyone. And this pattern continues throughout the films. In the books, Draco constantly starts confrontations. He seeks Harry out to insult him. He goes out of his way to make Harry's and other students' lives completely miserable. Even in the first book, we see Neville coming back to the common room after having been humiliated by Draco in the corridors. But in the movies, these moments are toned down or cut out completely. Movie Draco seems to be reacting to situations rather than creating them. He's more passive. He doesn't seem to be seeking people out to belittle them or bully them or torment them. And that's a really key difference. Because reacting to situations in a certain way could be put down to how you're raised, to these innate ideas that are instilled within you by your parents. But choosing to seek people out and create these situations, that's more active, that's more deliberate. And that's who Draco is in the books. Now let's talk about just how cruel book Draco actually is, because the movies downplayed this quite a bit. So in the Chamber of Secrets, after Hermione is petrified and she's lying in the hospital wing, Draco makes jokes about it. When Hagrid is taken to Azkaban, Draco mocks that too. In the Goblet of Fire, when Death Eaters are terrorizing Muggles after the Quidditch World Cup, Draco tells Hermione, "Granger, they're after Muggles. Do you want to be showing your knickers in the air? Because if you do, hang around." He says they're moving this way and it will give us all a good laugh. Like, he's literally laughing about the idea of Death Eaters torturing Hermione, assaulting her in public in front of everyone. He enjoys the whole concept of somebody being bullied or tormented or even killed. And look, that might just be talk, right? But Draco does some genuinely nasty stuff in the books himself. Stuff people tend to forget about. During a Quidditch match in the Philosopher's Stone, he literally says, "You know how I think they choose people for the Gryffindor team? I think it's people they feel sorry for. You see, there's Potter, who has no parents. Then there's the Weasleys, who have no money. And you should be on the team Longbottom. You've got no brains." At just 11 years old, he is weaponizing dead parents, poverty, and insecurities to help these people. And he does it loudly and publicly, and it's a performance to humiliate them in front of everyone. But here's the thing, the movies cut so many of these instances, right? Sure, they show Draco calling Hermione a mudblood, but they cut so many additional instances of him reaffirming that belief, of mocking her for being muggle-born, of laughing when she's hurt or humiliated. And they show him trying to get Hagrid fired, but in the books it's much bigger, and he relishes it. As it's ongoing, he brags about it to other Slytherins, taking genuine joy in ruining this person's life. In the movies, he joins Umbridge's inquisitorial squad in the Order of the Phoenix, and it's shown in like a passing montage, but in the books, he loves the power that gives him over other students. He says about how members of the inquisitorial squad do have the power to dock house points. So he says, Granger, I'll have 5 from you for being rude about our headmistress. And, oh, I forgot, you're a mudblood, Granger, so I'll have 10 more. In the movies, we don't see how much he uses that authority, or how he actively uses it to torment Harry and his friends. The books show us how much he loves the power it gives him, but the movies soften so much of his worst behaviours. They make his insults more generic, make him more of a typical schoolyard bully, rather than being these targeted, vicious attacks that we see in the books time and time again. And that's a huge difference, because Book Draco isn't just mean, he seems to love cutting the other students as deeply as he can, targeting their deepest trauma and insecurities. And that's like sociopath behaviour. So here's something else the movies completely miss. Draco is actually really intelligent and talented. Like, not as smart as Hermione, obviously, but he's consistently shown to be a strong student, gearing up to be a very gifted wizard. He does incredibly well in his potions OWL, such that he's able to take it for any WT as an option, even before finding out that Slughorn will take students with slightly lower marks. He repairs the Vanishing Cabinet, something even Dumbledore finds to be impressive. He's able to cast a non-verbal spell on Harry in the Goblet of Fire, right before Moody turns him into a ferret. And non-verbal spells is something that's typically not taught until 6th year. And even then, we see 6th-year students struggling with it, whereas Draco's got it down and ready to use against Harry in the 4th year. And in The Half-Blood Prince, we learn that he's been studying occlumency, which is an incredibly difficult art of shielding your mind. A skill that we see Harry struggle with, and only really the most gifted wizards like Snape and Dumbledore and Voldemort truly manage to grasp it, but Draco manages. There are so many examples in the book of Draco being gifted and determined, whether that's because his parents can pay for extra tutelage for him, or because they pressure him to work harder and achieve more, or maybe he's just like self-motivated or naturally that gifted. Whatever the reason, the books are clear on this, but generally the movies make Draco seem less competent. There's no real evidence of him being exceptional with his magical ability. Like, he seems average at best, sometimes even incompetent. Like when he and Harry chase the snitch in the Chamber of Secrets and he falls off his broom and lands on his bum, which isn't how it goes down in the book. When Buckbeak attacks him in The Prisoner of Azkaban, he whimpers and makes such a huge fuss. In the book, it's described as giving him an injury where blood is blossoming over his robes. Like, he milks it for sympathy, but it is a pretty bad thing that happened to him. Whereas the films just show him whimpering and blubbing like a baby, with no evidence that it was anything really that bad at all. And it makes him seem weaker and less capable. And as a result, he ends up having more vulnerable moments where he's presented as a little bit of a fool or comic relief. Whereas Book Draco is a legitimate threat. He's clever, he's skilled, and when it's paired with the cruelty that we've seen over and over again in the books, we see that he uses those abilities to hurt people. Like when he's dueling in the corridor and he ends up cursing Hermione and her teeth grow, which again wasn't in the movies. And so you see, movie Draco seems like he's all talk, no action, which makes him more sympathetic, but also far less interesting. He's less threatening, and honestly, it makes him a bit of a wet blanket in the films. All bark and no bite, so to speak. And so all of this brings us to the Half-Blood Prince, right, where everything changes, because this is where Draco is given the task of killing Dumbledore. Now, both the book and the movies show him struggling with this mission, right, but the way they show it is very different, and the impact is drastically different as a result. Now, in the book, we see Draco deteriorating slowly. Harry notices early in the year that Draco looks different. You know, at Madame Malkin's, Harry sees him, and Draco is described in his typical way. A pale, pointed face, white blonde hair. But later at Slughorn's Christmas party, Harry observes that Draco has now got dark shadows under his eyes, and this distinct greyish tinge to his skin. He's losing weight, he looks sick, and Harry becomes increasingly convinced that Draco is up to something that is taking a toll on him. And then we get to the bathroom scene, and in the book, Harry checks the Marauder's map, and he sees Draco's dot in a bathroom with Moaning Wurtle, which is bizarre enough. So Harry goes to investigate, and he pushes the door open and finds Draco Malfoy standing with his back to the door, his hands clutching either side of the sink, his white blonde hair bowed. And Myrtle is trying to comfort him, saying, "Don't, tell me what's wrong, I can help you." And Draco says, "No one can help me. I can't do it. I can't. It won't work. And unless I do it soon, he says he'll kill me." And his whole body is shaking, and then the book says that Harry realised with a shock so huge it seemed to root him to the spot that Malfoy was crying. Actually crying. Tears streaming down his pale face into the grimy basin. And this is a massive moment because we've never seen Draco vulnerable like this in the books. We've never really seen him break down. And it's not played for sympathy, it's played for shock. Like Harry is frozen in place by the surprise of it all, because Draco, the arrogant bully who's tormented them for 5 years, is sobbing in a bathroom because he's terrified he's going to be killed. But in the movies, we have a much more condensed version of this scene. It's much less detailed. We don't get the slow build-up of Draco's deterioration through the year, and so the emotional weight is lessened because we haven't been watching Draco slowly fall apart for months. And then seeing Draco crying has far less emotional weight because he was sobbing after the Hippogriff attack 2 years earlier. 3 years earlier. Maths, not my strong point. Now in the book, as this scene of Draco crying plays out, Draco realizes Harry's there, and they end up getting into a fight. The book says that Malfoy's face was contorted when he realized Harry had seen him crying, and he raises his wand and he says Cruci before Harry cuts him off with Sectum Sempra. Like he was going to use Crucio on Harry. Now the movies again soften this because it's not clear that Draco is using an unforgivable curse on Harry here. When he turns and sees him in the film and they have a duel, it's just generic curses that he's firing. And it's this pattern establishing, right? The movies soften Draco yet again. His cruelest moments are whittled down, particularly in The Half-Blood Prince. And in partnership with that, they emphasize Draco's fear and reluctance. Whereas this moment where he's willing to use an unforgivable curse on Harry, not as part of his mission, but because he was there when Draco was vulnerable. That's the nail in the coffin for the movies in terms of ever really showing us the true version of Draco from the books. Then we get to the scene where Draco confronts Dumbledore in the Astronomy Tower, and in both the book and the movie, Draco can't go through with killing him. He can't do it. But the lead up to this moment and the dialogue are quite different between the two versions. You see, in the movie, Draco says, "I don't need your help. Don't you understand? I have to do this. I have to kill you, or he's gonna kill me." He's full of reluctance. He's desperate, and you can tell this kid has no choice. Again, the vulnerability is the key aspect. We rewind a little bit before that. Harry witnesses the confrontation between Snape and Draco in the corridor. And in the movie, it's a much smaller moment, but in the book, Harry hears Draco say, "I know what you're up to. You want to steal my glory." Draco is paranoid. He genuinely believes that Snape is trying to take credit for his task. And at the same time, he's so desperate for status and desperate to prove himself that he sees Snape's attempt to help as competition rather than support. And look, maybe he's masking his fear with bravado a little, but he never relents. He never goes back to Snape when it's all a bit too much. He gets on with it, and he keeps trying to carry on with the task. Because that's what the books have been building up to. Draco has been making all these choices, trying to be like his father, following the path towards being a Death Eater, because he wanted to be important, to be powerful, to be like Lucius. Growing up, he wanted to be important and to act on his cruel thoughts. And the books do a great job of making that clear, year after year. So when he gets to that position in The Half-Blood Prince, it's a bit more believable that maybe he does want to do this, at least up until the point where he actually has to go through with it. It's much more of a complex journey for Draco in the books, whereas movie Draco is presented as a victim of circumstances. So fast forward to the Deathly Hallows and we get one of the most important scenes, right? Malfoy Manor, where Harry, Ron and Hermione are captured by the Snatchers. And in the book, Harry's face has been hit with Hermione's stinging jinx, and it's described as making him huge and shiny and pink, and every feature is distorted. He's basically unrecognizable. And Lucius Malfoy is desperate here, seeing this as his chance to regain Voldemort's favor. The books say Lucius Malfoy sounded avid when he asks Draco to identify Harry. But when Draco looks at him, it says that Harry saw Draco's face up close now, right beside his father's, and they were extraordinarily alike. Except that while his father looked beside himself with excitement, Draco's expression was full of reluctance, even fear. And Draco says, I can't be sure. And then, I don't know, and he walks away. And this scene has been interpreted in so many ways. Some see it as Draco actively choosing not to identify Harry, which in turn saves his life. Others see it as genuine uncertainty combined with fear of being wrong. And I think the book is deliberately ambiguous, which is brilliant, because even if Draco knew that it was Harry and chose not to say so, that doesn't automatically make him good. I mean, he knew the consequences of being wrong, and maybe some part of him didn't want Harry's death on his conscience. We saw at the top of the Astronomy Tower the previous year that he's not a killer, right? But that doesn't erase 6 years of cruelty. At the same time, he knows what will happen if he says it is Harry and then it turns out not to be. So the uncertainty could just be a degree of self-preservation. I think we can all agree that the book leaves everything deliberately ambiguous. But the movies are really frustrating here because in this scene, Harry's face isn't nearly as distorted as it should be. It is clearly Daniel Radcliffe with some swelling. So when Draco hesitates, it plays more as a deliberate choice. No ambiguity, no chance that there's fear of being wrong, just Draco flat out covering for Harry. And then in the Deathly Hallows Part 2, they add a line that's not in the book at all. After Harry saves Draco from the Fiendfire in the Room of Requirement, Harry asks him, "Why didn't you tell her it was me?" He says, "You knew it was me." Like, the movies are clearly using this as a way to give Draco some kind of redemption, assuring us, the audience, that there's no ambiguity there, Draco definitely knew, and he definitely chose to save Harry's life. They leave no doubt that Draco deliberately didn't turn Harry into Bellatrix. Not like transfer him into Bellatrix, but like turn him over. I think the book chooses ambiguity because Draco's story is complex, and so it fits, right? We try way too hard to force characters into a good or a bad box, when there's so much more going on. There is fear and inner conflict. We talked in this video about how cruel Draco could be, but so much of that could be down to nurture, to Lucius's Death Eater influence on him from a young age. And then he starts to make his own cruel choices when he's old enough to know better. So is that his fault? Or is it the only thing he's ever known? It's ambiguous. There is an argument either way about his moral responsibility, and that's the beauty of how Draco is crafted in the books. And it's a theme through all of Harry Potter. People aren't just good or bad. There's complexity, there's moral ambiguity. There are different things feeding into the decisions they make, into the people they are. But the movies flatten that, and they soften so much of Draco and his worst behavior, which makes it easier to just see him as a product of his upbringing. Just a scared kid who never really wanted any of this. And they give him that moment of clearly saving Harry in Malfoy Manor, and reinforce it later in the Room of Requirement, and it's clear to see that the movie version is much easier to redeem, and so that's what they've tried to do, because they didn't give the audience a chance to see the worst of Draco in the first place, and so that redemption is much easier to come to. So Draco's story, in a way, gives us an interesting parallel with the story of Sirius Black, and again, you might not know that if you only watch the movies, because Sirius was also raised by blood purists who valued all the wrong, most terrible things, and his family ended up giving us multiple Death Eaters like Bellatrix and Regulus, but you wouldn't know a lot of that depth to Sirius's story, or many other things about what he goes through in the books, because the movies cut so much of it. They cut so much of Sirius's story, which honestly is one of the most tragic stories in all of the wizarding world. Sirius Black is one of the most complicated characters from the Harry Potter series. Ridiculed by his parents for not being a cruel blood purist, fiercely loyal friend, he goes straight from school to a war against Voldemort, to being wrongly imprisoned for murder, and everyone thinking he betrayed his best friend, 12 years in prison before a few short years of freedom, until he is murdered by his cousin. There is a lot going on there. There is a lot of trauma, a lot of underlying issues, a lot of nuance for that character's story. But I'm sorry to say, I don't think the movies did Sirius Black justice. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly how they flattened one of the most complex characters in Harry Potter and just turned him into another generic wise mentor to add to the list for Harry. So book Sirius is 33 years old. 33. Not the distinguished older gentleman that Gary Oldman portrays, but a man who was thrown into Azkaban at 21 and spent over a third of his life having to have his soul slowly drained by Dementors. Just think about that for a second. When Sirius went to prison, he was barely an adult. He'd gone straight from Hogwarts to fighting a war, to losing his best friends and rotting in the most horrific prison imaginable. He never got to have his 20s. He never got to grow up properly, to learn from his mistakes, to develop emotionally, or the emotional maturity that comes with actually living your life. Gary Oldman, brilliant actor though he is, was in his mid to late 40s when he portrayed Sirius, and he had to be, because Alan Rickman was cast as Snape, meaning Snape had to be aged up, and the Marauders, being the same age, also had to go the same way. And so we have more mature versions of these characters throughout the movies. But that's the thing, Sirius isn't mature. He's barely in his 30s, with the attitude of someone barely in their 20s, and so when Gary Oldman is distinguished and older, we see a character in a totally different stage of life. We see a character who says he was in Azkaban for 12 years, but if he was in his mid to late 40s, that means he would have been about 30 by the time he was imprisoned. He'd already had some life experience. And it also means that he probably lived some life before the First War started. And that change kind of ripples through the entire character of Sirius Black, right? Because book Sirius had this manic, restless energy that runs through everything he does. He's quite literally like a caged animal who's been set free but doesn't know how to handle the open air. There's something wild and unpredictable about him. Something that makes you understand why he was sorted into Gryffindor alongside James Potter. Why they became such infamous troublemakers. Like, even his physical description screams this energy, right? He's supposed to be gaunt from Azkaban with long black hair that he's constantly pulling out of his face. He's moving with quick, sharp gestures. He's fidgety and he's intense. And when he gets excited or angry, the energy kind of explodes outward in ways that can be unsettling. But movie Sirius speaks in measured tones, moves with this controlled grace. And even when he's supposed to be reckless or impulsive, there's still this underlying sense of a man who has things under control. Oldman brings gravitas to every scene, which works for many characters, but I think it just misses for Sirius Black. Because Sirius was supposed to be dangerous, right? Not evil dangerous, but unpredictable dangerous. He's someone who escaped from an inescapable prison by turning into a dog and slipping through the bars. He lived in caves eating rats just to be near Harry. He broke into Hogwarts, he slashed portraits. He's impulsive and reckless, and when he gets an idea in his head, he acts on it, even without thinking about the consequences. Like when he goes to King's Cross to see Harry off at the beginning of his 5th year and gets spotted by Lucius Malfoy. Book Sirius has this barely contained wildness that makes perfect sense when you remember that he spent 12 years maintaining his sanity by transforming into a dog. Like, he's been more animal than human for over a decade, and some of that sticks. But movie Sirius feels domesticated, refined, right? Like he's been through therapy, which completely undermines the tragedy of his character. Because the whole point is that he never got a chance to heal properly. He went from traumatized young man to broken, slightly older man without ever getting to be a healthy adult in between. So as we've established, Gary Oldman's portrayal of Sirius is a bit more measured, a bit more controlled, not quite as eccentric or erratic compared to how Sirius is in the books. Because in the movie, Sirius sort of retains his dignity, right? Particularly through the 5th installment. There's the odd sign of frustration, sure, but mostly he seems okay with being cooped up in the childhood home that likely reminds him of a lot of trauma that he experienced growing up. But in the book, there are layers to how this imprisonment in a triggering environment really has an impact on him. In fact, we can compare 2 books back to back, right? When Sirius has freedom in the Goblet of Fire, he's living in a cave just outside of Hogsmeade. He transforms into a dog, he goes into the village, he feeds off scraps. Something we've established is very natural to him. He spent a lot of time as a dog, and it allows him to be able to move around. And he's close to Hogwarts, probably one of the happiest places for him. In the same way that Harry hated being with the Dursleys, but found Hogwarts to be a safe haven for him, Sirius probably had the same thing. Growing up in Grimmauld Place with his family, Hogwarts probably a safe haven. And so he's in a much better place, being able to roam around, being near Hogwarts, being near Harry, and as a result, he actually gives very responsible advice to Harry during the Triwizard Tournament, telling him to be careful, trying to give him advice about the dragons. But fast forward a year, Sirius is trapped in his childhood home. He regresses completely. And as I talked about in my video about Snape in the books, Harry Potter establishes how trauma and traumatic triggers cause characters to regress. And that's exactly what we see with Sirius in the books. Being stuck in the home that he suffered years of abuse and neglect and judgment from his family, it caused him to become petty, to take his frustrations out on people, to get into little arguments. He becomes moody, he becomes depressed. There's actually evidence to suggest that he maybe turns to alcohol to get him through it as well. When we first meet Mundungus at the start of the Order of the Phoenix, he is described as giving off a strong smell of drink and stale tobacco. Later, when Harry and the Weasleys head to Grimmauld Place for Christmas after Arthur's been attacked, Sirius enters the room, having previously been in his house, presumably alone but for Creature, and he's said to give off a Mundungus-like whiff of stale drink. It sounds like he's been drinking alone, and enough to smell like alcohol. This isn't just someone having a bad day. This is someone whose mental health is actively deteriorating because he can't handle being confined again. He was wrongly imprisoned, wrongly confined, and now he's being imprisoned again in a house that reminds him of all of his childhood trauma. And in the books, that has a very understandable impact on his character. But in the movies, Sirius might be frustrated, but he maintains his dignity and his composure. Where Book Sirius is falling apart, and this is crucial for the story too, because if he's falling apart from being confined, it makes Voldemort's trap, making Harry believe that Sirius has been captured, far more believable. Because Book Sirius can be reckless, more so after the cabin fever he feels from being confined. But we see it in a conversation he has with Harry, right? In the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius suggests coming to meet Harry, despite the fact the Daily Prophet just announced that he'd been spotted when he snuck to King's Cross to say goodbye to him at the start of the year. So when Harry says it's a bad idea, Sirius actually sounds a bit hurtful and vindictive in his response, telling Harry, "You're less like your father than I thought." He says the risk would have been what made it fun for James. Like, Sirius knows how much Harry idolizes his father. So to say that, Book Sirius is petty and immature and tactless and kind of emotionally manipulative, to be honest. And this cruelty extends beyond just his interactions with Harry. We see it time and time again with his treatment of Creature, the house elf. Now, Creature, again, is almost certainly a trigger of childhood trauma, a reminder of his mother and the circumstances that he grew up in. And so Sirius in the book seems to actively enjoy making the house elf miserable. And at the end of the book, Dumbledore points out after Sirius's death that this cruelty directly contributes to his own destruction when Kreacher betrays him to Bellatrix and Narcissa. It's also ironic because in The Goblet of Fire, Sirius judges the way Barty Crouch treats his own house elf, the elf that is almost certainly a trigger for him and his own trauma with his family. And that's when Sirius gives the quote, "If you want to know what a man is like, take a good look at how he treats his inferiors, not his equals." And then we see how he treats Kreacher a year later. But all of this is to say that book Sirius has genuine character defects that show us someone whose judgment has been warped by trauma and whose emotional development got stunted at a crucial age. But the movies wanted a clear-cut father figure with maybe a rebellious streak here and there. They wanted to polish Sirius, make him likable. But book Sirius is selfish and sometimes cruel, and he often makes terrible decisions. But paradoxically, I kind of feel like that's what makes his love for Harry more meaningful, because it exists alongside all of these flaws rather than in their absence. Do you know what I mean? He's not this polished, perfect character who fits in a box. Father figure for Harry, and I love Harry like a father would love his son. He's complex, he has complex things going on, and so his relationship with Harry is complex, and it's more meaningful for those complexities. And we're going to dive into his relationship with Harry now. So in the books, Sirius doesn't really seem to see himself as Harry's father figure. He sees Harry almost like an equal. It's like for Sirius, Harry is a replacement for James as a best friend, but also maybe for Regulus as well, his younger brother who Sirius never really knew defected from Voldemort's side. To Sirius, at least in the books, Harry sort of filled the void left by all these people that he'd lost. And that's not necessarily healthy or appropriate, but it does make their bond very unique. Because Sirius isn't trying to be to Harry what Dumbledore is, or what Arthur and Molly are. Think about it from Sirius's perspective. He is emotionally stuck at 21. He's been isolated from human contact for 12 years, and suddenly he's faced with this teenager who looks exactly like his dead best friend, and has the same reckless streak. Of course he's going to relate to Harry more like a peer than a responsible guardian. When Harry gets excited about potentially living with Sirius at the end of The Prisoner of Azkaban, he's imagining finally having a father figure, having a family unit. But when Sirius offers him a home, he's probably imagining something closer to having a roommate. Two guys living together, taking on the world, just like he and James used to. But the movies flip that dynamic, right? Movie Sirius actively tries to be kind of paternal. He gives Harry wise advice about good and evil. He talks about them being a proper family. He offers comfort and guidance in a way that feels genuinely fatherly, where book Sirius talks to Harry about pranks and encourages him to break rules, and when Harry won't take risks to see him, basically calls him a coward by comparing him unfavorably to his father. Which brings us back to that conversation that we talked about earlier, where Sirius wants Harry to sneak out and meet him in Hogsmeade, but Harry, for Sirius's best interest, doesn't want Sirius being spotted and caught. So Harry's kind of being like the father now. So when he says no, Sirius makes him feel bad, says he's not as much like James as he thought, because he's not thinking about Harry. He's not being a father figure. He's thinking about himself and what would make him feel less lonely and less bored. And this moment is crucial because it shows Harry that Sirius doesn't necessarily see him as his own person. To Sirius, Harry being like James is the highest compliment, and being unlike James is an insult. It's the complicated, unhealthy dynamic that the movies were too afraid to explore in their relationship. So instead, movie Sirius comes across as someone who genuinely wants what's best for Harry, who sees him as an individual, and who's trying to be the parent Harry never had, which is lovely and heartwarming, but it's not the relationship they really shared. And look, I understand why the movies wanted to give Harry a genuine sort of father-son relationship. It's deeply satisfying to see this thing that Harry has been missing for years finally there. Sirius being warm and nurturing. But Harry and Sirius's relationship is kind of a commentary on people, right? And it's a big thread that goes through the whole Harry Potter series. You can't just put a person in a box. People aren't just good or bad. They're not just brave or smart. And so when our expectations of a person are so black and white, they're bound to come crashing down. We see it with Harry's view of Dumbledore being this perfect, unflawed role model, which comes crashing down in the final book when we see all of his rough edges. And that's so apparent in the book relationship between Harry and Sirius. Harry desperately wants a father figure, and he projects that need onto Sirius, even though Sirius can't really fulfill it. It's complex, it's unhealthy, it's kind of codependent, and it's actually really interesting to think about how they both project their needs onto the other in a way that long-term could never truly be fulfilled. And it's actually interesting to think about if Sirius had never died, how would that have come to a head? Harry projecting a fatherly figure onto Sirius, Sirius projecting a James-like figure onto Harry. But they're both too human to just fit into those boxes and fill those voids for each other. It's interesting to think about how that would have come to a head when they realize they can't put each other on that pedestal or fit those square pegs in those round holes. But Sirius does die, so we'll never know. And that death is another big thing that they changed in the movies. So let's talk about that next. In the books, Sirius is hit by a red spell, most likely a stunning spell, and he falls backwards through the veil. It's not explicitly fatal, which is what makes it so haunting. For us, the reader, and for Harry himself, the veil isn't really explained at this point, so we don't really know what it means to fall through it. We don't know that it means that Sirius is dead. So, Sirius is laughing at his own joke 1 second, and then his expression changes to surprise as he falls beyond the archway and disappears forever. But it takes some time for us as readers and for Harry to process that that's it, that he's dead. In the movies, Bellatrix hits him with Avada Kedavra, and then he falls through the veil. So there's no mystery, there's no ambiguity, there's no lingering what just happened, or room for denial that Sirius might not be dead after all. Because even if the veil doesn't mean death, he's been hit by a killing curse first, so he's definitely dead. In the books, Harry has this slow journey of realization. He kind of expects Sirius to step back through the veil, or to land on the other side of it. And it takes him time to realize and come to terms with what happened. It is slow, it is painful, torturous even for Harry. The agony of each second that his godfather doesn't come back. Whereas I feel like the movie is the equivalent of just like ripping off the band-aid, right? It is quick, and it is over with. And though I think it's done fairly well, Harry's silent screams, the way the movie makes Sirius's last words, "Nice one, James," it's still an important difference. And if you've seen my video about why the entirety of the Battle of the Department of Mysteries has been changed for the worst in the movies, you'll know that it loses a lot of the emotional poignancy in these moments, particularly for Harry. Like, the movies don't give him that scene in Dumbledore's office after everything to let Harry let all of his anger out. They don't give us the emotional weight of Harry coming to terms with the fact that he either has to kill or be killed after hearing the prophecy. And Sirius's death is just another part of that runs so much deeper in the books. And though, like I say, I think it's done fairly well in the movies, it still misses something. Because making Sirius so clearly dead with the killing curse just kind of curbs the drawn-out emotion of Harry having to realize and process his godfather's death. While there's a true symptom of grief, denial, so present that we don't really know if he's definitely dead. So after Sirius, there are maybe 2 other characters who are really not given anywhere near the care or attention they deserve from the movies. And the one who is maybe talked about the most is Ginny Weasley. She's cool, she's popular, she's talented, at least in the books, whereas the movies gave us none of that. So the Harry Potter movies are criticised for some of the changes they make from the books, and I don't think any of those changes get criticised quite as much as the character of Ginny Weasley. People say movie Ginny doesn't have a personality. They say the filmmakers took away all the interesting parts of who she is. They criticise the fact that she ties Harry's shoelace in an attempt at flirting, and that they spend absolutely no time in the films focusing on the things that she's good at, like Quidditch and dueling. All around, the general consensus is that movie Ginny is just a vapid love interest for Harry. Now, my most viral video ever is dunking on movie Ginny.
What's a movie mistake that you notice every single time you watch that movie?
Okay, I notice this every time I watch Harry Potter.
So if you watch Ginny here really closely, you'll notice they forgot to give her any kind of personality whatsoever. I'm quite proud of it. I think it's quite funny, but the last thing that I want is people to think I've just jumped on a bandwagon. So to justify my video, I have decided to really dive into and break down all of the major differences between book Ginny and movie Ginny. So to really understand Ginny's character and why she changes so much from books to movies, we kind of have to look at where she comes from. Because growing up as the youngest Weasley, the only girl with 6 older brothers, that shapes who you're going to become. And in the books, they do a great job of having this fundamentally build the foundations of who Ginny is and why she is the way she is. She had to learn to be tough. She had to learn to stand up for herself. She had to learn to make herself heard. And you see it right from the start, right? Even at 11 years old, standing in Flourish and Blots, she's the one who stands up to Draco Malfoy. Like, that's not just bravery or foreshadowing her being a Gryffindor. That is somebody who has learned to speak up, who's learned not to back down, even against people who are older and more intimidating. And it makes perfect sense, because growing up with Fred and George's brothers, I'm sure you either learn to fight back or you become a permanent target. And that carries on through the whole series, right? Look at how she handles her brothers. When Ron tries to tell her who she can and can't date, she absolutely tears into him and reminds him, It's none of his business. She can make her own choices. We see it again in The Half-Blood Prince when Percy comes home with Rufus Scrimgeour at Christmas after having broken his mother's heart and completely abandoning his family for at least a year. Ginny is the one who throws mashed parsnips at him. Because that's who Book Ginny is, right? She's someone who isn't afraid to stand up to anybody. She learned from a young age that if you want to be heard, sometimes you have to make some noise. But it just feels like the movies missed most of this, right? Even in the moments that we do get, like she stands up to Malfoy in Flourish and Blots in the films, but it's immediately overshadowed by Lucius entering the scene. And apart from that, we get very little in the way of the foundations of the kind of character Ginny is going to become. They sort of miss showing us how she became who she is. The interactions with her family that shaped her. Like how she learned to play Quidditch, right? In the books, we find out that she's been breaking into the broom shed for years, taking her brother's brooms when they weren't looking. She taught herself to fly and to play Quidditch because they wouldn't let her join in. And that's such a perfect example of who Ginny is. She doesn't wait for permission. She doesn't accept being left out. She finds a way to do what she wants anyway, and do it well. Like, she doesn't just teach herself to fly and play Quidditch, she gets herself to the standard where she plays professional Quidditch as an adult. And so in the books, finding out about moments like that really shows us that Ginny grew up in this family, and that made her resourceful. It made her independent, and it made her someone who could stand on her own. The movies don't really give us any of that. They don't show us how she learned to be strong, how she learned to be fierce, or how she learned to hold her own. In fact, they kind of don't even show us that she can be fierce and hold her own. And so without all of those foundations, and without understanding where she comes from, movie Ginny just sort of feels flat. Like she has no depth, no history, no real personality of her own. Because you can't understand who Ginny becomes without understanding where she started. You can't appreciate her strength without seeing what made her strong. So let's talk about who Ginny actually is in the books, because it's completely different from what we see in the films. In the books, Ginny is this force of nature, right? She is confident, she is witty, she's got this sharp sense of humour that can cut through any situation. Like when Harry is worried that Voldemort might be possessing him, and he's isolating himself from everyone, Ginny is the one who calls him out. Well, that's a bit stupid of you, she tells him, seeing as you don't know anyone but me who's been possessed by you-know-who. Book Ginny is direct and unafraid to tell Harry Potter himself when he's being an idiot, but also understanding exactly what he's going through. And this is kind of a key moment for Ginny because it's showing us that what happened in the Chamber of Secrets hasn't just left her. She hasn't just forgotten about it, as though it happened to someone completely different. But we don't even get that moment in the movies. She barely speaks, and when she does, it's usually awkward, like that whole shoelace scene.
Shoelace.
The movie takes this fierce, funny character and they turn her into this wallflower. This person who just sort of exists in the background until the plot needs Harry to fancy someone. Like, look at how she handles herself in the books when Zachariah Smith is being particularly annoying. Which time, you might be wondering, because Zachariah Smith is the most annoying character in the whole series. He ends up commentating on a Quidditch match and he's being the worst because that's who he is. So Ginny literally crashes her broom into his commentator box just to shut him up. And when Ginny's brothers try to control who she dates, she reminds them exactly where they can stick their opinions. And she does it with this perfect mix of anger and wit that leaves them just completely speechless. Because that's the thing about Ginny, she's sort of a real character in the books. She's not just strong or just brave, she's genuinely funny. She's multifaceted, right? She makes jokes about Harry having a Hungarian horntail tattoo. She does impressions of Fleur that leaves everyone in stitches. I mean, it's mean, but people find it funny. And she's always ready with a comeback or a quick remark. And they just don't give movie Ginny any of that. She just stands there looking awkward, being quiet. It's like they took everything that made Ginny interesting, everything that made her unique, and they just sort of erased it and replaced it with this completely different person. And the thing is, this isn't about Bonnie Wright's acting, though I know some people will put it on her. It's about how they wrote the character when they put the films together, what they chose to show and what they chose not to include. Because look, Bonnie Wright can't play a personality that isn't in the script. You can't show confidence the director doesn't want. You can't deliver witty lines that were never written. I know for some people that's a hot take, but I really don't think Bonnie Wright is the problem. So here's the thing about Book Ginny, right? She's not just Harry Potter's love interest. She's not just Ron's little sister. She's actually really talented in her own right. Let's start with Quidditch, right? In the books, Ginny is an amazing Quidditch player, and not just in a convenient plot device kind of way. Well, okay, kind of it is a bit plot convenient, right? She starts off being a substitute seeker when Harry has to sit out, and then when he comes back, she ends up being conveniently a very good chaser too, so she can stay in the team. But despite that convenience for the plot, we actually see her develop as a player. And we get given an explanation as to why she's so good that's really in character for her. We learn that she'd been sneaking out to practice since she was 6, breaking into the broom shed when her brothers weren't looking, teaching herself to fly, teaching herself to play Quidditch because they wouldn't let her join in. Which is really sexist of the Weasleys, by the way. I feel like that detail gets passed over quite a lot. What, because she's a girl, she can't play? Maybe it's because she's the youngest? Maybe Molly's really protective of her baby and is like, no, she can't go on a broom. Either way, it pays off when Harry is banned from playing Quidditch. Ginny steps in as Seeker and she leads Gryffindor to victory. And actually that's a fundamental part of Harry realizing he has feelings for her, seeing her as this brilliant, competent Quidditch player. And then later she goes on to become this incredible chaser, so good that she eventually plays professionally for the Holyhead Harpies. All of this kind of fundamental to who Ginny is and to the relationship she ends up having with Harry. But in the movies, we barely see her on a broom. We never really get to see her talent, and we never get to see this huge part of who she is, besides shouting at people during tryouts. And it's not just Quidditch that's glossed over in the films, right? Book Ginny is an incredibly powerful witch. She is famous across Hogwarts for her bat bogey hex. It's so impressive that even Slughorn invites her to the Slug Club, his elite club, just because he saw her cast it. That's how good it was. Remember, Slughorn only has time for the biggest, best, and most powerful witches and wizards. And after a single curse, he's like, yeah, Ginny's one of them. Not to mention, in the books, she's one of the few students who can produce a full corporeal Patronus. She is brilliant at defensive magic, she is a natural leader, and that brings us on to Dumbledore's army. Because in the books, in the Deathly Hallows, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione leave Hogwarts to hunt Horcruxes, Ginny is one of the leaders of the Resistance, along with Neville and Luna. She is teaching other students how to fight, she's organising rebellions across the school against the Carrows. She even leads the team to try and steal the Sword of Gryffindor, because that's who Book Ginny is. She's someone who steps up when things get dark, when things get tough, and she fights back, and she leads. Movie Ginny, that's all just gone. We barely see her Quidditch skills, if at all. We don't really see her magical talent besides in a quick montage of Dumbledore's army in the Order of the Phoenix. But even in that montage, she's not really doing anything that stands out. She's just doing the same as everybody else in Dumbledore's army. And we don't see her leadership apart from when she shouts during the Quidditch tryouts one time. In fact, in the Half-Blood Prince, where so much of this side of her comes out, the confidence and the ability and the leadership, in the films, we mostly just get her crying because she's arguing with Dean, which is such the antithesis of who she is. And I'm not even sure in the Deathly Hallows films they mention that she's part of leading the Resistance within Hogwarts. Like, it's very clear that Neville is, and Luna to an extent, but Ginny is sort of just reduced to a joke when Harry and Ron reappear in the Room of Requirement. So instead of everything that makes Ginny great, in the films we just get these awkward romantic moments, these quiet scenes where she barely speaks, and these moments where she just exists to be Harry's love interest. And frankly, it ruins her character. Because Book Ginny isn't interesting because Harry Potter has a crush on her. Harry Potter has a crush on her because she's interesting. She is this powerful, capable witch, a talented athlete, and a natural leader. The movies just strip all of that away. They take this complex, capable character, and they reduce her to just the girl Harry ends up with. So one of the most frustrating things about movie Ginny for me is how they completely strip away all of her relationships. And I'm not just talking about her love life and her relationship with Harry, I mean her friendships and her relationships with her siblings. She has all of these deep, complex bonds with other characters that are just gone in the films. Let's start with Hermione, because in the books, these two are actually really, really close. They share secrets, they confide in each other. Hermione even stays in Ginny's room when she goes to the Burrow. I can imagine part of that is just because Molly doesn't believe in co-ed sleeping arrangements. But still, they're bound to bond and get close if they're staying in the same room for an entire summer. Or maybe even multiple summers, because don't they room together in Grimmauld Place too? And Ginny really helps Hermione to navigate her feelings for Ron, while Hermione helps Ginny to get over her crush on Harry by just telling her, date other people. Learn to be yourself around him. In the movies, these two characters barely interact directly. You'd never know they were meant to be good friends, or future sisters-in-law. They're just two people who happen to be in the same scene sometimes. Then there's Luna, another friendship that got completely sidelined. In the books, Ginny is one of the few people who actually stands up for Luna, who defends her against her bullies, who actually sees past the Loony Lovegood nickname to the person underneath, and she even tells Ron off for using the name Loony Lovegood. Luna even paints this beautiful mural in her room of all of her closest friends, including Ginny, That's how important their friendship is to her. But in the movies, do we even see them interact? Like, I know they both go to the Ministry together to fight, but I'm not sure we see them have much of a conversation. And then there's Ginny's relationships with all of her brothers as well. The movies completely miss how she learned to hold her own. Growing up with Fred and George's pranks, standing up to Ron's overprotectiveness, throwing mashed parsnips at Percy when he betrays the family. This is someone who grew up with 6 older brothers who had to learn to be tough and to be fierce and to fight back. But movie Ginny might as well be an only child. We never really see that side of who she is or how it shaped her. The movies just sort of take this character who is rich and complex and has all these relationships, who is shaped by her interactions with her family and friends, and they turn her into this isolated figure who only exists in relation to Harry. And it's such a shame because these relationships weren't just background detail. They were fundamental to who she was and to why she became such a strong character and why she and Harry actually made sense together. So we've danced around it, let's now jump into Harry and Ginny's relationship. Because in the books, this romance kind of feels earned. It develops naturally over years. We see Ginny get over her starstruck phase, start dating other people, become her own person, a person who in the end has a lot in common with Harry Potter. Her interest in Quidditch, her natural ability at hexes and curses that suggest she's naturally great at defense against the dark arts just like Harry, and her overwhelming sense of right and wrong. The books give us enough reason to see why Harry falls for her. Because of those things they have in common. Because she's funny and she's fierce and she's witty and she understands Harry in a way that other people don't. But in the movies, we get the shoelace scene. We get awkward silences and the kiss with maybe the least chemistry in all of film history. We get this relationship that comes out of nowhere, and yet we're supposed to believe they get married, have kids, and have a relationship that lasts at least 19 years. In fact, the movies don't even have the grace to give us the scene where Harry breaks up with her at the end of The Half-Blood Prince. And that's the thing, this relationship has so many complexities and it's so multifaceted with her being Ron's brother. Wait, no, she's Ron's sister. And there's the moments where Ron is like, you're not messing her around, are you? You know, she used to be obsessed with you and then she finally got over it years later and now you're interested in her. And then he breaks up with her because he's going to hunt Horcruxes and he's worried about her being put in the line of fire if he's the one out hunting Horcruxes. And yet he kisses her before he goes on the Horcrux hunt despite the fact that he's broken up with her. There's so many layers to it, right? But in the films, Ginny barely seems to speak around Harry and then suddenly they're kissing. And we're supposed to just believe in this romance, even though we've never really seen it build or seen why they work together. The films skip the little moments. And so it goes from being a relationship that actually makes sense in the books into something that feels completely random and happening just because it's supposed to in the films. Okay, I have saved this one to last because in the books, Luna Lovegood is my favourite character. Not just because she's quirky and weird, but because she has these huge moments of vulnerability. And we see those moments in the books, but they never make it to the screen. This is how the movies ruined my favourite character, Luna Lovegood. Fans love Luna Lovegood, both in the books and the films. The way she is unapologetically herself, the way she loves her friends so fiercely. But there's a lot of differences between book and movie Luna. The films leave out some core aspect of her character, as well as some of the more sinister parts of how she's treated by others. So let's dive into the key differences between book and movie Luna. In the movies, Luna's quirky beliefs are whimsical and fun. People make little jabs about them as though they're a shared inside joke.
Probably full of nargles, though.
What are nargles?
No idea.
There are references to her being bullied, but we don't see any examples of it on screen, really. We never see anybody treating her particularly badly. But in the books, that is completely different. Firstly, from her very introduction, we see Luna being called Loony, even by Ginny, who for all intents and purposes, becomes Luna's best friend. And it's such a casual use of a fairly rude nickname, which gives you insight into what Luna's life is like. Behaviour like this is completely normal and casual. And then Neville, who, let's be honest, is pretty low on the Hogwarts social ladder at this point, reacts in such a way that even he doesn't want to sit with her. Ginny has to reassure him that she's alright after all. And Luna's mistreatment is so normalised in the books that you realise it's a part of her day-to-day life. We see other characters going as far as to literally point and laugh at her in the middle of the Hogwarts corridors, as though that's not awful behaviour to openly and obviously bully someone. And even Hermione, who fights for house elves, and even felt like an outcast herself in the first book when Ron said she had no friends, she finds herself being dismissive and short both with Luna and about her, as though she doesn't even warrant a conversation. You can also see that Luna reacts angrily here, a side to her that we don't see in the films. In the films, she's quite airy-fairy. She's not concerned with other people's thoughts about her. We even see her talking about her belongings being stolen, and keep in mind it's probably her Ravenclaw housemates that did it since they'd be the only ones who had access to her dorm, but again she doesn't seem bothered by it.
Things we lose have a way of coming back to us in the end.
But in the books, she gets irritated and angry in certain instances, like that argument with Hermione. Maybe it's because she's fed up with the way people talk to her and treat her, or maybe it's because her dad has raised her to believe in conspiracy theories quite militantly, which is something we'll come on to later in the video. Apart from Hermione introducing Luna as Loony by mistake in the films,
Everyone that says Loony love...
we don't really see the two of them butt heads very much in the movies, but it happens quite often in the books. They argue about their differing beliefs in things. I want to liken it to a faith versus science argument. Luna has faith in what she believes, whereas Hermione needs proof, but Luna's beliefs are closer to conspiracy theories and imaginary creatures than arguments of faith. And therefore it's much easier to dismiss her like we would dismiss flat earthers or anti-vaxxers. But I guess if you live in a world where magic and unicorns were actually real, and there were these skeleton horses that you can only see when you've seen somebody die, well, it would be much harder to discount things as make-believe. Either way, much like in the films, Luna in the books grows closer to Hermione over time. Hermione, once she sees how loyal Luna is, learns to bite her tongue and not endlessly confront her about her ridiculous beliefs, which is not a courtesy she lends to Xenophilius in the Deathly Hallows. But speaking of the trio's visit to the Lovegood house in the Deathly Hallows, we get a really emotional moment that is skipped from in the films entirely. Luna's bedroom in her house is a huge homage to her friends, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville and Ginny. Now on the face of it, that's really sweet. How strongly she loves these 5 people that mean so much to her. But if you dive deeper, it's actually quite sad. Has Luna never had friends before these people who she only got close to 2 years earlier? And also, while we know that Harry, Ron and Hermione like Luna, it feels like Luna's feelings of friendship are much stronger than theirs. It feels much more one-sided. For example, at the beginning of The Half-Blood Prince, Harry, Ron, Hermione and Ginny are hanging out at the Burrow before going back to school. Now we know that Luna lives close by, but at no point is she invited to hang out with the people who she sees as her closest friends. The people she has painted on her bedroom walls. And that makes the friendship feel quite unbalanced. And speaking of unbalanced, one of the biggest and one of my personally least favourite differences between the books and the movies is Luna and Neville in the Deathly Hallows. In the final film, the filmmakers randomly decided to give them a little romantic flicker.
You haven't seen Luna, have you? Luna? I'm not for her. I think it's about time I told us.
And I hate it so much. This doesn't happen in the books, because in the books, Neville and Luna have very satisfying and complete character arcs without the need for a romantic interest. There are a couple of other aspects of Luna's friendships that differ between the books and the films. Firstly, her friendship with Ginny in the books is really lovely. Ginny stands up for Luna when people are being mean about her, like here where Ron calls her Loony, which is actually quite interesting because Ginny introduced her as Loony in the Order of the Phoenix book in the first place. But also when Luna commentates on the Quidditch match, she's clearly very fond of Ginny. It's a really heartwarming relationship, and I wish we got more of it in the films. Much like Luna's relationship with Ollivander, which again is glossed over in the movies compared to the books. Ollivander and Luna share the trauma of being kidnapped and held hostage at Malfoy Manor together, and during that trauma, they appear to have bonded. It's not touched upon too much in the books, and it's not terribly important to the major plot, but it's a nice detail that I would have liked from the films. I have a headcanon that eventually Luna takes over Ollivander's wand shop, but that's a theory for another day. So Xenophilius Lovegood is an interesting man, and Luna's relationship with him is just as strange. Though their relationship doesn't vary too much from books to films, there is something underlying that feels more apparent in the books. You see Xenophilius, much like Luna, has these quirky ideas and beliefs, many of which he prints in the Quibbler. Now in the films, the Quibbler is mostly presented as an alternative to the Daily Prophet, one that tells Harry's side of the story in the Order of the Phoenix when nobody else in the wizarding world will listen to him, and that's its main function in the plot of the films. But in the books, we get a bit more information about the kind of stories they post normally. The conspiracy theory about Sirius Black actually being famous musician Stubby Boardman, or about Cornelius Fudge being a goblin serial killer. If we were to compare the Quibbler to something in our society, it's basically an alt-right publication that writes about how the Earth is flat, how vaccines are putting microchips inside of us so the government can control us, and about how the royal family are really lizards in skin suits. When you couple this with Xenophilius's unwavering belief that the horn in his house is from a crumple-horned snorkack, which is an imaginary creature, when actually it's a dangerous and explosive erumpment horn, and even though Hermione tries to correct him, he won't have it to be, you start to realize his beliefs aren't just quirky, they're dangerous. And then you can piece together the fact that he raised his daughter with all of this misinformation, so that she would believe it all unquestionably. And it starts to feel almost abusive, similar to raising a child in a cult. Imagine raising a child to believe every teacher they have is wrong, all of their textbooks are wrong, and actually all of these imaginary creatures exist. And then your daughter is ridiculed and bullied for believing those things. It starts to feel much darker than just a quirky man letting his daughter believe these whimsical little things, which is how it's presented in the films.
She's a much more tragic character in the books, isn't she? Anyway, if you enjoyed this long breakdown of the characters from Harry Potter, I have another long video you might love, and this time I rank everything in the Harry Potter series. From the best movies, the best books, to the most powerful items, and way more. So you might want to watch that one next.